everything.
At the time, and he decided to commit himself to making a declaration, and he made the Balfour Declaration. This is absolutely essential to understanding what's going on in the Israel-Palestine conflict. It's a very short letter, and in it, Arthur Balfour describes his absolute commitment to creating a Jewish homeland. And there's not a single mention of the Palestinians. That's the really remarkable thing about it. Not a single mention of the Arabs who live there. And one other thing I found out from this fantastic book is that Boris Johnson, before he was foreign minister, Boris Johnson said this was it was a brilliant example of a fudgerama, a foreign office fudgerama. It was so vague. The Balfour Declaration isn't really it's just rhetoric. He used his exact words, fudgerama. It was classic sort of foreign office speak. Now he didn't repeat that utterance when he got into power, when he became foreign minister. Never heard Boris Johnson repeat that idea that the Balfour Declaration was a fudgerama. In fact, Theresa May and Boris Johnson re-established their commitment to Zionism very strongly, and on the anniversary of the Balfour Declaration in was it 2016 or 17? I can't remember. Theresa May said she was extremely proud of Britain's role in the creation of the State of Israel. Now, most people in Britain don't really know much about the history of where it comes from, Israel, Palestine. They don't really know the conflict. The conflict, the background. They're not being really told the history of it. And considering how important strategically Israel is for the American empire in the Middle East, and as part of the West's war in the Middle East. I say war on the Middle East, not in the Middle East. The entire Middle East is a conflict zone. Considering how important it is, it's quite remarkable we never got taught anything about. I never got taught about the Oslo Accords. Never got taught about the Balfour Declaration. I never got taught about the PLO and its history and its sort of various sort of ebbs and flows of power. None of it. Not got taught any of it. But the thing I would have wanted to know more than anything is that the only Jew in the British cabinet at the time, Edward Montagu, completely opposed Zionism and thought it was a terrible idea. And that it was Arthur Balfour who chose not to listen to that Jewish member of the cabinet and chose to just go ahead with committing himself to the Zionist project. That's an important aspect of history which we should surely know. Surely.
Just one point, you said there's no mention of Palestinians. Doesn't it say though that the British government will respect the rights of the people who live in?
No, it says it will respect the rights of non-Jews. Okay? That's not the same as saying Arabs and Palestinians. I think that's important to differentiate them. And I don't even think they say they respect the rights of non-Jews, to be honest. I don't actually think it says that either. Have a look at it yourself. I'm just a guy on a ladder who's read a book. I'm not like an expert on this, not a historian or I come here, I see my role at Speaker's Corner is to come and channel what other academics have written, to just make it popular and to try and stir an interest in the subject. I mean, Israel, like I said, it's a very important country. It has nuclear weapons. It's engaged in a brutal blockade on Gaza at the moment, which is causing immense suffering to Palestinians who haven't done anything to deserve that. And I'm here not to criticize Israel, really. I'm here to criticize the United Kingdom. This is my government's role in this crisis. The British government have been continuing to sell weapons to the Israeli government, although we've also been buying weapons from them as well, buying drones. That's another thing that British people don't really know about. The very strong.
You ever visited Israel?
I've never visited it personally, no. But I do know that there's a very strong relationship between Britain and Israel. Why do you ask?
No, because I don't know if you know the distance between the border, the east border in Israel to the Mediterranean. You know?
What about it?
It's 20-25 kilometers. This is the distance. And if Israeli, if the conflict between the Israeli government and the Palestinians will not solve, the Israeli must defend ourselves because it's very, very tiny country.
Okay, right.
It's got an enormous amount of American aid.
Defend yourself.
Yeah, it gets billions of aid. And actually, we got to remember this. When the Israeli army was sending in helicopters to bomb hospitals and schools in Palestine, in the occupied territories, when that was going on, those were American helicopters. They weren't Israeli helicopters. Those were American. I think that's important to remember. It's really, what this is pretty much an American proxy war on that part of the Arab world. And by the way, the rest of the Arab world hasn't been great on this. Saudi Arabia has done almost nothing. In fact, now Israel is in an open alliance with Saudi Arabia. That's remarkable. I never ever thought I'd see that in my lifetime. Anything remote like that. Gents, would you mind taking your conversation? Sorry, it's just
Both
it's
sides.
hard to have two conversations going at once.
It also seizes land, doesn't it?
Sorry?
It also seizes land all the time.
Seizes land. Yeah, I mean, David Cameron was quite careful not to point this out because David Cameron was against the settlements, the illegal settlements on Palestinian land. But he never really actively condemned them either. So he was like not pointing them out and he was not in favour of them, but he wasn't condemning them.
What would be the ideal solution?
The ideal solution. Well, right now, before we even talk about what the ideal solution is, I just say Britain needs to withdraw the arms deals with Israel until Israel stops the blockade on Gaza. I think before we talk about a one-state solution or a two-state solution or any of that stuff, that's actually quite in the long distance. The main thing right now is stop this horrible Gaza blockade. I mean, right now the economy in Gaza is on its knees. The people they don't have a proper financial system. I mean, they're not getting proper food and education. It's just it's a terrible situation.
The Egyptians are responsible for that.
Of course they are. Oh, by the way, I'm not making this a Jewish-Muslim thing. This hasn't got anything to do with religion, and it's not about ethnicity. It's not about Jewish versus Arab either. The Egyptian state has done a huge amount of damage to the Palestinian cause. I mean, that's another thing I could talk about as well. Britain is a very misunderstood country. Do you two mind having a meeting somewhere else? Sorry, it's a bit distracting. Yeah. The thing is, I'm not anti-Israel at all. I'm not anti-Israel. I'm not even here to criticize the Israeli policy on Gaza. I'm here to talk about Britain. That's my. Sorry? I'm here to talk about my country, Britain. That's why I'm interested in what my government's doing. I'm not like.
What about you?
So I was just explaining to these lovely people here listening to me that the British government is far more supportive of the state of Israel than British people realise. The media don't really report on it. The media don't really give us the statistics and the facts. We need to understand the relationship. But Britain recently I think a couple of years ago, brought some drones from Israel. In the financial services in the City of London, a lot of the security software they use to stop cyber attacks is from Israel. There are lots of close relationships which people aren't aware of, and this is continuing even despite the repression of Palestinian people, the murder of Palestinian children in Gaza. Some of these people are just sitting under a tree, these young children, Palestinian people, sitting under a tree, and they get sniper rifled from hundreds of meters away, just because they happen to be a few hundred meters away from this fence. It's despicable. And now you mentioned Egypt as well. Egypt has a very important role in this. They are maintaining the blockade as well, helping to stop Palestinians coming out. In fact, it's interesting you mentioned Egypt and Palestine in the same sense. The reason why Britain is traditionally saw Palestine as such an important, region, is because of the Suez Canal. The Suez Canal is the most crucial strategic point on the planet Earth. The canal that links the Indian Ocean with the Mediterranean. When the Brits and the French were sort of carving up the Middle East and drawing arbitrary lines on a map, literally by pencil, deciding where different countries would be after the end of the First World War, Britain was fine. They said to the French, have Lebanon, have Syria, they don't matter. Lebanon and Syria are not important strategically. The countries they wanted were Egypt and Palestine. They wanted to have that, And you know what, we get the sense, I think now in the media, it's like this idea that Palestine was thrust on Britain. It was a mandate. We had to look after it after World War I. No, it wasn't that at all. Britain really desperately wanted to have that land. Yeah. So today, where we are today, that's what you asked me about that, right?
There's another question.
Yeah.
British as well. Do you think we have...
Look at this guy, look at the shower.
The same thing happened in India and Pakistan.
Oh, India and Pakistan, it's the same system. Yeah, same.
It was a British lawyer who never visited the country who drew the line.
It was Field Marshal Waverley, as far as I remember his name. He was the main proponent of creating this new country. It was Churchill who said to Waverley, as Churchill left a meeting with him in the Foreign Office, Churchill said to him, keep a bit of India. Pakistan is on that whole subcontinent. Pakistan was the most important strategic region for Britain at the time. When it was clear that the Indians did not want to work with Britain after independence, they wanted to have nothing to do with Britain after independence. Britain wanted to create Pakistan as a way to maintain its control on that part of Central Asia. In fact, Pakistan was the only really important part of India for the British Empire. That whole region. Yeah, the northwest, because it gave. I mean, really, it's sort of like a pivot. That Central Asia pivot, including Pakistan, Afghanistan, those kind of countries. Yeah, they're the key to Asia. If you want to control Asia.
They're coming from that region. That's news to me.
Remind me, you're Indian, right? Yeah. So I've just been reading Arundhati Roy's fantastic book. I know you're British as well. What's going on in India is quite frightful as well. You know, this conflict between the Hindus and the Muslims. That's something we don't really hear much about as well in the media. Because India is a good, obedient, neoliberal country. You know, they do what they're told by the United States, basically, because they're part of that sphere of influence. You know, all that awful stuff going on in the early part of this century, where Narendra Modi was, I believe he was actively collaborating in some of the repression of Muslims living in India. Remember, there are more than 100 million Muslims living in India, even now. Even despite being constantly attacked and terrorized. Some of these women were being raped and burned to death. I mean, it was awful. Terrible, terrible conflicts. Mainly happening in Gujarat. And yeah, I mean, Indians seem to keep voting for these people, these far-right nationalist Hindus. It's remarkable.
Should we boycott India?
Should we boycott it? I don't think we should even boycott Israel. I completely oppose the boycott of Israel. I'm a South African originally, and I don't think the boycott on South Africa did anything to really help. Yeah, I believe that 100%. I mean, if you wanted, the main thing that needed to be done to bring down the racist regime in South Africa was not boycotting South Africa. It was educating white people on why they should stop supporting the system.
White people in South Africa?
In South Africa. That was the main thing that needed to be done. And I'm not saying things in South Africa are perfect today. There's still a terrible problem with land. There's not enough land. Like 60%. Is that right? Yeah, it's so dangerous that they don't get. Yeah. But I don't think we should boycott India or Israel. Boycotting a whole country just because, I mean, by that logic, we should boycott Britain. If you think about it. I mean, Britain, the United Kingdom has done far more to create human suffering than Israel has. The United Kingdom has done far more to create suffering than South Africa did, or... When? I could speak about just in the last 10 years. Do you want to just confine it to what's going on right now in Saudi Arabia, the blockade on Yemen? We could just keep it to that. Not only is Britain selling weapons to Saudi Arabia to prosecute that hideous war, they're actually actively in the command rooms. There are British RAF pilots in the command rooms telling them where to target. You know, it's like they're fighting this war with the Saudis. You know, it's despicable. Sorry.
What's coming next year, all the year after?
Why do you say that?
Why? It happens like once every 80 years. Exactly a cycle. There's no a crash for the world.
No, there's a big crash every 80 years, and then there's a smaller crash every 15 years.
Yeah, I know.
We already had the big crash in 2008.
Yeah, what I'm saying is it will come. Next, the world's going to face a crash. And if you create more unemployment, you get more people going to right. It's already happening right for years.
Well, this is the thing. I'm saying this as a committed leftist. I'm so sad at the way the left haven't provided a sort of stirring vision for what Britain should be like. The right are starting to do that now, and that's why Britain's moving even more to the right. We've always been more right-wing than the rest of Europe, but we're getting even more to that direction now. I mean, like,
Even Germany.
sorry?
Even Germany.
Oh no, in Germany, Germany, the actual, like, Alternative for Deutschland is an actual sort of I see it as a kind of neo-fascist organization. Thank God there's nothing like that in Britain. UKIP is tiny, so it's not like... Yeah, I know Marine Le Pen in France. It's the failure of the liberal project, the neoliberal, you know. They've created, since Thatcher's period, since the 1980s, inequality has gone up and up and up, and there's been no real correction for that. We've had stripping back of social services. There's not been proper funding for healthcare, for education. Well, the healthcare in Britain is funded very well. It's just a lot of that money ends up in the pockets of corrupt trusts and privatized entities. That's the problem. But if you want to understand now, we have to understand Thatcher. She's the most important British politician in the recent period. Like since Clement Attlee, she's probably the most important person to understand. There was a real revolution under Thatcher, like a counter-revolution against what Clement Attlee achieved, you know? I'm not moving away from the point. I'm saying that what has happened is capitalism has created so much inequality now that the anger is bubbling up. And instead of the anger being targeted towards elites, the capitalist media, especially the right-wing media, have managed to scapegoat immigrants in a very effective way. And I find it horrendous what's going on. Not just scapegoating immigrants, but gypsies, ex-convicts, left-wing intellectuals who've got nothing to do with power. They haven't got any power.
So are you saying then, do you think
already
people
talking to
are
him.
worse off today than what they were 20 years ago, or 40 years ago, or 50 years ago?
It's a very hard question. I mean, I think there was a sort of stronger sense of hope back in the back in the post-war
but
period.
people worse
Now
off
there's not
today.
that sense of hope. Like activists in the 60s and 70s had such a strong commitment to social justice and correcting abuses and so on. Nowadays, I spend a lot of time with activists in London, and there's a sort of sense of hopelessness a lot of the time. So in that sense, I think things have gotten a bit worse. On other things, in terms of gay rights, if you're a woman or you're gay, just in my lifetime, in my very, very short time on this planet, if you're a gay person or a woman, it's changed dramatically. It's gone a lot better in Britain. I mean, Britain is still very sexist. I think it's still a sexist country, to
But
be honest.
again, a lot better than it was.
Yeah, a lot
10,
better.
20, 30 years.
I was reading how Sunderland doesn't have a women's shelter, like a domestic violence shelter. That's a massive city, Sunderland. They don't have a women's shelter. It's cut, you know, that's just terrible.
There used to be none, and now there's hundreds.
Okay, now you're talking big picture. Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
But just remember,
But
can I
that's
just
what I'm saying.
can I just
So
point something
things
out
are
here?
better now
All
than
the
they were
achievements
50 years
that Britain's achieved have been because of ordinary British people. They've never been given to us, you know, on a platter by the elite. They've had to be wrested from elites by a struggle. It's not fun. It's not enjoyable. It's not a pleasure. It can be pleasurable if you make it so. I think they are. This is why I like Jeremy Corbyn. I think he far more represents ordinary British people than Boris Johnson ever could.
Why is he therefore got a worse race? Do you look at the society today?
False consciousness. False consciousness.
Nowhere.
Do you not? I don't think you understand the power of the media in this country. There's been an incredibly vigilant. Yeah, often it's people who are in the media who don't realise. Yeah. Yeah.
But the
They
point being is,
actually, they're effectively this particular leader. The Sun, the Express, the Mail. The Mail actually is moving to the left.
Oh, it's not. Just because it's not so much against Brexit anymore doesn't mean it's moving to the left. From what I've spoken to people about Speaker's Corner, it seems like we're going to crash out. I don't think it's going to. No, I didn't. No, genuinely, I didn't know that. That was not clear 3 years ago at all. No, not at all. It wasn't even clear that Brexit was going to happen 3 years ago. But now we have the Brexit. Look at our Brexit minister now. I mean, so I'm quite worried that now that Britain's leaving the EU, what we might see is the people who run this country, the real people who control Britain, are going to start deepening their relationships with repressive regimes to make up for the lack of a market in the EU, to make up for the lack of that market to trade with. I think they're going to cement their trade relationships with repressive regimes anymore. And when I talk about repressive regimes, I'm talking here about Saudi Arabia, Nigeria, Indonesia, Egypt. Yeah, Egypt. I was stunned that Theresa May's ambassador to Egypt described it as moving steadily towards democracy. And I'm like, this is what I mean. You know, you can be in the system and not see anything at all. Clearly, how it works. I mean, like Al-Sisi is awful. No, maybe they do understand it. They're just pretending they don't. I mean, that's the thing. If you go to the National Archives in Kew and you read some of the history, if you can go into the archives, you can see what the people who run Britain think. That's more helpful than any Marxist thesis or any. You just read what they actually tell you themselves. They never mention human rights. All the men in the Foreign Office who've worked there since World War II never mention human rights. Hardly ever comes up as a discussion. Hardly ever comes up. When Saddam Hussein was gassing Kurds, for example, Britain was happy to sell Saddam Hussein weapons. In fact, ex-SAS men were going to train up Saddam Hussein's bodyguard. When Saddam Hussein was attacking Iran, sending cluster bombs and all kinds of awful attacks on Iran, Britain was selling weapons to both sides, to the Shah of Iran and to Saddam Hussein. So they don't care. The men in Whitehall are I don't want to get into the psychology. I'm not very interested in psychology, to be honest. Their motivations are sordid, though. You can say that at least. I find, I hear about this. When the Iraq War happened, for a few years after that, as I was growing up, it kind of politicized me. I started hearing people describe British people as arse-lickers, you know, for joining the Iraq War. And I just find that distasteful. I've been called anti-British in the past for my criticism of Westminster's policies on Iraq and so on. And I found myself defending British people, saying they've got nothing to do with. They were marching out in their millions, you know, against the war. That's an ordinary British person. And I say this repeatedly at Speaker's Corner, it's true. British people are some of the nicest people in the world, for the most part. They can be quite hypocritical sometimes. But I mean, they're the kind of people that you bump into them in the street and they will say sorry to you. You know? That's the kind of thing, they're very gentle people. So they would never go to war unless they were stirred up for
Go
it.
to Saudi Arabia and ask them to pay for the war and lower our taxes.
Not just them. No, not just them. There is a significant strain of British people who really love the empire. Something like I think it was recently, the poll was half the British Empire, half the people supported. We do it. First of all, we do have an empire. It's less easy to see, but it's still there. First, there is a British Empire. Maybe we don't have it. Tony, would you like to get up and say something to these lovely people instead of just shouting from the back there? So yeah, no, there's a significant number of British people who really support the British Empire. They think it was a good idea, very proud of it. Again, I think it's this issue of just not knowing enough about history. I don't think it comes from any malignant sort of bad, you know, Arabs and so on, bad black people. No, it's just, I think it's ignorance. They don't know. They don't know. They don't understand what actually went into the empire. I think George Orwell put it really well. The empire was basically a policeman and a soldier pinning down the native while the banker went through his pockets. That's basically what it was. To do a debate of for and against the British Empire, for me, is like doing a debate for and against rape. It just doesn't make sense to me. It really is. Fundamentally, imperialism is a violent, aggressive, invasive act. To sort of say, oh, well, we gave them railways, you know, we gave the Indians railways. I mean, it's just like, yeah. First of all, we did, and then if you look closely, nearly all the railways led to the sea. And I wonder why they did that. I wonder what was happening to India. I wonder what was happening to the Indian economy, and what kind of resources are being drained out to the world's oceans. That's the reality there. Also, all the great powers are doing that. This is the most common refrain I hear at Speaker's Corner. Oh, all the empires are doing it. First of all, none of them did it quite as well as the British Empire. Second of all, just because the others were doing it doesn't make it somehow justifiable. You're not justifying it. Okay, my mistake, sorry.
Empires succeed in co-opting.
I'm answering his question. Wait a second. Calm down.
Co-opting the indigenous. Calm down yourself. Patronising.
Is that really what he said? Well, that's like saying I prefer a rapist who uses a condom than one who doesn't use a condom. It's like, well, yeah, you're still getting raped. The Indians were still being systematically plundered and had all their livelihoods taken from them, you know? We operate on what determination? Are you talking about the president, American President Wilson? Wilsonian idealism they talk about, right? Yeah.
Self-determination.
Yeah. So self-determination, unless you're a Latin American country who wants to keep its resources and you don't want to have it plundered by the US, then we intervene. Or unless you're Vietnam or one of these places, these disobedient countries who don't do what they're told. Iraq, Syria is the most catastrophic example. Recently, what happens?
So you think Brexit is an imperial project, then, do you?
I don't think Brexit is a debate between one group of capitalists and another group of capitalists. All right, that's really what it is. It's between the financial capitalists who want a hard Brexit, so that London can continue to be the butler to the global super rich with nothing being held back from the EU. That's the financial hard Brexiteers, and then there's the manufacturing Brexiteers who want a soft Brexit so they can continue their trade with EU. To do their selling their stuff and their agricultural products. That's really what it comes down to. I'm a Remainer. I don't really care about this shit. It's not that important.
Democracy, basically, because the European legislation doesn't debate any laws that it makes. It just presents them to the European Parliament, and the illusion is given to the people that the MEPs debate each law, which they don't.
Do you know the UK has all kinds of democratic deficits? That doesn't mean you should just leave the UK. The UK, for example, I was reading about...
Answering the question.
No, it's not. I'm using an analogy, if you can follow what I'm saying. The democratic system in Britain is not foolproof.
It's only half democratic.
I don't even consider it really democratic at all. It's
The House of Commons is
yeah.
half.
You got the House of Commons, that's a start. But then there's the House of Lords, which is totally unelected. So, but that just because we have those archaisms, it's because we have a monarchy. For crying out loud, we have a monarchy in a supposed democracy. That doesn't mean you just leave the UK because you're unhappy with that. There's this mentality I see a lot recently, which is if you don't like something, just leave it. You know, if maybe that friend of yours is annoying you, just don't try and talk about it with him. Leave him. If you don't like your husband, just divorce him. If you don't like your job, just quit. Instead of trying to stay at it and fix it and make it better and improve it, we just have this mentality of leaving. Like it's just sort of a lazy attitude, I think. You know, don't even try to make it better.
The Green MP for Sheffield, Magic just become an MP in that region. And he hadn't realised how undemocratic it was, and now he wants to rip it down.
Yeah.
To rip what down?
The EU.
Well, then this is the thing. All these Brexiters who think that the EU is undemocratic. Hi, Martin. How are you doing?
A Green MP.
Well, why don't you talk about what Westminster and Whitehall's lack of democracy? Why is it always? I think a lot of what this is
Fallen from his eyes.
right. Yeah, you just don't want to listen to me. I think you're not interested in what I have to say.
Why don't you want to talk about the undemocratic
I think you would.
EU?
I think both of you would rather get up and talk about the EU. I'm not here to talk about the EU. I'm trying to have a much broader picture of British foreign policy. I'm trying to paint a picture in your minds, all of you. So that if you take away anything about this country today from the Speaker's Corner, you just remember one thing, that Britain is not as it appears. The British elite have an official policy, and then they have an operative policy which they actually act on. And they're vastly different. I gave the example of supporting Saddam Hussein right the way through his gassing of Kurds in the 1980s. What about the example of, let's say, what's going on in Bangladesh right now? Britain has been... In 2011, Britain was selling weapons and arming up and training the Rapid Action Battalion to go around killing trade unionists and women's leaders in Bangladesh. Anybody who'd stand in the way of production, stopping capitalist production in Bangladesh, they were being killed. That's a far more interesting aspect of British foreign policy. What we're doing in the world outside of Europe. It's interesting in Europe, but there's so much more to discuss. And yet that's all we're being encouraged to talk about. That's all that's on the front pages. That's all that's being. And the Brexiteers don't want to talk about that. They love to just talk about the one issue with Europe. I think it's a displacement. A lot of the media have successfully displaced a lot of irritation at Whitehall onto Brussels. The right-wing media are against, they're in favour of Brexit. They are displacing a lot of very well-founded and understandable anger at Whitehall that ordinary British people have, especially outside of London, displacing that onto Brussels. It's like it's a distraction. Right, basically, from the real issue. The real issue is, what is Britain's role in the world, and why is Britain being involved in a conflict somewhere in the world at least every year since 1945, when no other country has done that? Not even America or Russia have been that aggressive. Why? What is it about Britain? It's elite, just so pathological. I mean, that's...
What's that say about Europe? They don't stop us from doing that or say something about us doing it.
I have plenty to say about Europe. I've been at Speaker's Corner criticising Europe many times. I could do that. Yes, I have. I gave the example. No, I gave the examples. For example, of Sudan. Wait, sorry, Somalia. When Somalia's fishing was being interrupted when it was being sequestrated by the European Union, Somalians were turning to piracy, very understandably, as a way to support themselves. That was all because of the EU. And I was criticising the EU for that. I'm not here. I have plenty of things to say about France. France was involved in an illegal attack on Mali. Was it 2015? They attacked Mali, bombed it. I could talk about Portugal and the way Portugal. I could talk about lots of examples around Europe. The reason I focus on Britain is because it's where I live. I'm interested in my government.
I'm saying if what you're saying is...
It's not because I don't think Europe is perfect.
And you're saying, I'm a Remainer, Europe isn't bad for that, Romania's not bad. Surely they would be calling us out.
Not necessarily. Remember, European Union is a sort of neoliberal capitalist entity, just like Britain, the British government. Both the European Union and the British government serve the interests of big business primarily, and the rest of their population are seen as a labour force. That's really how they see the public. Either way, this is why I said it's not really a big debate to me. It's a debate between two sections of the capitalist class on how best to conduct capitalism. And that's just not, I'm sorry, that's just not interesting to me. I'm here to try and stir up people's imaginations for an alternative to capitalism. system based on social justice. Not on what makes the most money, but what meets the most human needs. What meets them? Sorry? Well, for me, socialism, and not just any kind of socialism. I believe in libertarian. No, I'm not a Marxist. There are many issues of Marxism which haven't been fully addressed by the Marxists. There's a tendency towards an authoritarian state, which I don't think that's very helpful. I'm a libertarian socialist, and more specifically, I describe myself as a communalist. Now, what is a communalist? A communalist is someone who believes that ordinary people are more than capable of making the decisions that affect their lives politically.
Freedom of choice of what you get to do or where you
Yeah.
want to buy.
I believe that every single neighbourhood and town in Britain should have its own assembly where those people, those townspeople,
Local councils
should
are
meet.
that.
That's not what a local council is, my friend. A local council is an elected body of deliberators making decisions for you, right, on behalf of you. I'm not talking about an elected body. I'm talking about you directly making the decisions yourself. It's so hard. People always say this to me when I talk about communalism. They say, oh, we already have local councils. And yeah, we have local councils and they need to be strengthened. I mean, British people, they trust their local councils far more than they trust their MPs. And that's for good reason. The local council is much closer to you and is more representative of you. That's better. They should have more power. Yes, they should have more power. The Swiss model is better than what Britain has. I believe the cantonal system is more... It's a more rational system. Although Switzerland is by no means a full democracy. I mean, it's the way that's how Switzerland sees itself, and it represents itself to the world. But it's not necessarily. Referendums are only a small part of a democracy. You shouldn't take one aspect of democracy and make that the whole thing. A referendum is a part. It's a specific tool that you can use in a democracy to gauge the opinions of the masses. But there's far more to a democracy than just doing referendums every day. Well, for one thing, there used to be far more town meetings in Switzerland. I believe now there's only one town somewhere in the more remote regions of Switzerland which has face-to-face town meetings to make the decisions about the town. The name of the town begins with a G. If someone can remember for me, I don't know. But that's the problem with Switzerland. It could be more democratic. Every town in Switzerland, every neighbourhood, every commune, every village could have that, but they don't. I don't know for sure. I don't know why it's happened. The important thing is that it's happened, and that it doesn't need to be that way. It could change. And now Britain could have the same thing. Why is it that there's no really formal way that British people can get involved in politics? Why is it always got to be outside the system, through protest, through lobbying, through doing what I'm doing, public speaking? Why is that the way that British people have to have their influence heard? Why is it through Facebook? Why is it through protests and protest meetings? Why isn't there a formal, structural way of making decisions?
Because it's a monarchy.
So once every 4 years, or 5 years, I always forget, 4 or 5. Once every few years. Well, that's what the Chartists wanted. The Chartists wanted annual elections. And annual elections, I think, would be better than having elections every 4 years. I mean, yeah, that would be better than nothing. But we could go. Let's go beyond elections as well. Let's just go beyond elections. You need to have more imagination, my friend. You're thinking too much within the terms of our current system.
What do you propose?
I've just given a rough outline. I could go into more detail. if you like.
Elections every year.
I just said that would be better than what we have now, but it's not enough. We could have better. We could have more than that.
Elections every month.
No, not elections every month. Why do we need to elect the decision makers? Why don't we become the decision makers? Why don't all the competent adults of Britain take part in public policy? I mean, we're all adults. You say there's too many of us, and yes, okay, there's too many of us all to meet in London. Gents, would you like to have your meeting somewhere else, or? I mean, London, it would be impossible. London, it would be impossible for all the Londoners to get together and have a democratic town meeting in London. There's 8 million of us, so that's not going to work. However, you could break down London into smaller neighbourhoods and towns. You know, London is basically a collection of villages. Actually, if you look at it close on a map, it sort of doesn't really look like a city. It sort of breaks down into like Camden Town and Earls Court and so on. Break it down into those communities. That would make sense to me. And then I think we'd have a much better foreign policy. The reason why our foreign policy is fundamentally flawed and actually evil, basically immoral, is because British people don't have any control over it. If ordinary British people decided how Britain was to relate to the Ukraine or to Russia or to any of the countries of the world, we'd have a much better relationship with those countries. Much, much better.
Listen, Kyle.
As a people, we're basically a very moral, normal people. We don't like human rights abuses. We don't like torture. We don't like rendition. We don't like, supporting repressive regimes like Saudi Arabia. That's not what ordinary Brits want.
Kyle, let me ask you.
I don't think we like the fact that we're the second biggest arms dealer in the world after the United States. I don't think we like the fact that we are so much in the pocket of the United States and aren't able to pursue our own policy. That's what another thing that gets me really buggered off. Why is it the hard Brexiteers never talk about sovereignty when it comes to the United States? The real power that runs the world. It's not my friends, it's not the EU that runs the world, or runs even Europe. It's the United States that runs Europe and Britain.
Kyle,
I'm not exaggerating.
Kyle, listen, if you put the interests of other countries before the interests of your own country, does that jeopardize the interest of your own country?
No,
Does
it's not a
that-
zero-sum game.
Does that
International
make you
relations
take care of
never
your own country worse?
International relations never has to be a competition. It never has to be a zero-sum
It's
game.
always a competition.
No, it doesn't have to be like that.
But it has
was
been
like that.
throughout
It
history.
was really like that in the 19th century. I believe that it was. There was quite
always
open,
like
naked
that.
aggression towards places
Gunboat
like Iran.
diplomacy.
Gunboat diplomacy. That was the wonderful. Who was it? William Gladstone. One of our wonderful prime ministers said, "Gunboat, yeah, believe in gunboat diplomacy."
Otherwise, we'll blow you out the water if you don't do what we
Yeah, I mean, it actually continued. It continued right up until. It still exists today. Really, it's not that different. But it doesn't have to be this way. I have looked very carefully at the various sort of geostrategic priorities of the British elite, and I don't see why any of them have to be that way. I don't see why we have to continue to support
Well,
the
look
repressive
at-
Gulf
look again,
regimes.
then.
I don't see why we have to support.
Kyle, the reality is
Doesn't seem any reason why.
Kyle, there's nowhere else in the world to conquer. Because capitalist materialism has conquered everywhere in the world.
It's,
except
do you know,
North Korea
it's
and
even,
Cuba.
no, I was going to say it's even conquered North Korea. I was shocked to find this out. 2 weeks ago, I was shocked to find, okay, it hasn't conquered North Korea. You can never conquer North Korea because it has nukes, so that Britain doesn't want to go near it. However, Britain has been selling weapons to North Korea. I was amazed at this. I knew Britain would sell weapons to anybody.
There are different ways of conquering.
But I was shocked to find that Britain has been
source?
selling weapons to North Korea.
Source do you quote?
So I found this out from a book called Union Jackboot, which is all about some British foreign
who's the
policy.
author?
The author is a guy called T.J. Coles, and he's an academic at the. Well, you can find the footnotes yourself. I'm not gonna. Sorry, it's just a speech at Speaker's Corner. I'm not gonna wheel out my footnotes here. If we were at an academic seminar at LSE, I might have to quickly go get my citations, but. No, if you want to find out more about him, his name is T.J. Coles. He's part of the Plymouth Peace Institute, and he's written about this extensively. Now, how does Britain manage to sell weapons to North Korea? How does that even happen? First of all, we have an ignorant media which doesn't bother to tell us about it, right? If British people knew that, they'd be absolutely shocked, and Britain would never allow. The British government wouldn't sell. No, I don't think most British people would be shocked if they found out we were selling weapons to North Korea, but we are. Now, what are we selling specifically? What are the weapons? They're selling helmets. They're selling parts for attack helicopters. How they managed to get this through into North Korea is by classifying them not as weapons, but as what they call, and I love this is typical British euphemism, non-combat military components. That's what they call them, non-combat military. So, like, in other words, like, you can't directly use this to kill someone, but basically, you couldn't use this in any other situation except for a conflict. I mean, that's what. I love that. I love that classic English understatement, don't you? It's wonderful. We never called our war in Indonesia the Indonesian War. We called it the Indonesian confrontation. We never called the attack on Malaya in the 60s. We called it the Malayan emergency. We never called it the attack on Malaya or the Malayan, you know. We never called the American revolution a revolution. We called it the American War of Independence. We always like to downplay, to take the emotion out of things, you know. It's brilliant. I love it. The Indian Mutiny in 1840s. There was a gigantic mutiny. I mean, that's like, it makes it sound like a disobedient sort of group, rebel who signed a contract and hadn't followed their contract, and now that a few of them needed to be hanged. The Indian Mutiny was a full-scale attack. It was a war. The Indians had finally organised themselves well enough to attack Britain, or attack the British Empire, and try and get the British to leave.
I think they call it now the First War of Independence.
Right, the First War of Independence. That's a good idea.
One thing I was going to ask you, the Iraq War, I remember one of my friends who was in favour of the war said, we've got to trust our government. You know, they know better than we do. They know all the facts.
So that's quite a common conservative viewpoint on government,
I
yeah.
don't hear that argument anymore.
Well,
More savvy.
people are getting more savvy. I think since the Iraq War, they've known how, like, obviously the lies were about weapons of mass destruction. I think British people are waking up more and more. I've discovered recently, I've been reading, it all comes from reading, there's no other way around it. I read about how Gaddafi, there was a rumor that Gaddafi wanted to give his soldiers Viagra to go on sort of Viagra-fueled rape sprees in Libya. This was a big panic that was happening in Libya in 2010, and it was absolutely baseless. Gaddafi was a horrible man, but he wasn't doing that. There was no evidence that he was going to do that. But the media took the story in Britain and then they ran with it. The other example is that Saddam Hussein was putting human beings into shredders. He was shredding human beings and then using their bodies as fish food. This was completely baseless. Not a single bit of evidence to suggest this was happening. So now British people have had this happen enough times to them, where they've been hyped up. Remember, I told you that British people are very gentle, moral people for the most part. They don't want to go to war unless there's a very good reason. So they have to be whipped up into a frenzy through this propaganda. That's how it happens. But I think more and more it happens. I think they're getting more and more wised up to it now.
Okay,
they're not so stupid. They know that. Yeah.
Listen, do you think the British people are the only ones who are being indoctrinated into going to war for a reason supposedly just?
Of course not.
Then why are you focusing on that?
Why do I focus on the United Kingdom?
Everybody does
That's
it.
a good question.
Every single imperial power, in fact, every single country does it.
No,
they try
every
to
single
make
great power.
themselves look like the good guys. Not even great power. It can be a small power that does something bad,
you have a look
and then
at
they try to make themselves look like the good guys. Everybody tries to do it, always.
Yeah, every imperial war is a just war.
Not necessarily
every imperial war is a just war. That's
Not
how it's portrayed.
necessarily
Look at
imperial.
the
how it's
argument
portrayed.
between Greece and North Macedonia for 20 years over
So,
an area
yeah.
that is because of the history of that part of the Balkans.
Or no, they don't want it to be called North
No,
Macedonia.
the Greeks say Macedonia is part of Greece. The Macedonians say it isn't. It's an independent country.
So even small powers.
So they've
even,
settled for
yeah.
a name North Macedonia
Right, okay.
as
So-
a separate country, and they've been, they've had a war against one another.
So if I was living in Greece or if I was living in Macedonia, I would speak to that. If the Greeks had a speaker's corner, and I'm sure they have many, I like to think of them still as sort of like Athenian philosophers. Then I'm sure I'd speak about that. If I lived in China, I would be trying to talk about what China's doing. When I went to visit China, I could criticize China all day for what they've been up to. When I went to visit China, I was 16. I saw you couldn't even see the sun in Beijing. It was so polluted.
Yeah,
It was a real apocalypse. I think it's getting a bit better now, but it was just horrendous. But why am I going to get up and speak about that at Speaker's Corner? Why shouldn't I focus more on what my own country's doing, what my own government's doing?
Well-
That's a far more relevant thing to. First of all, there's more
Not
British people in the
necessarily.
audience, so they're more interested in what their own country's doing.
Kyle, to speak
Second
about
of all,
the evils
I'm British,
of the
so I'm-
world, you need to understand the world. It's
I
not
think
enough
I
to just
understand the world.
understand your own country.
I'm not as
to
naive as you
speak-
think I am.
No, Kyle, listen to me. You're not speaking about Britain just inside of Britain. You're speaking about British actions all throughout the world. And how can you possibly give any reasonable opinion about anything outside of Britain if you're saying that everything you know is inside of Britain?
I never said everything I know is inside of Britain.
Kyle, you're
So
saying
what is?
I
Let's
only
just
know
clarify
about
what
Britain,
we mean by Britain.
thus I only speak about Britain.
Let's clarify.
make
When
any
I say
sense.
British, what do I mean? I don't mean average British persons involved in this. Just want to make that really clear. I'm talking, usually when we talk about a nation, we're talking about a specific capital city of the nation. We're talking about London, what London wants. That's not necessarily the same as what people in Sheffield or Scotland want. It could be very different, actually. What's more, it's not even what ordinary Londoners want. I've lived in London my whole life, and I don't like what's going on in the Middle East, what Britain's been doing there.
What Britain did there
It's a
is
specific part of London. It's a certain elite. I like the way Mark Curtis, the political writer, describes it. He says Britain is a club. It's not really a country. Britain's a club. And there's a certain elite membership at the top, and they make most of the decisions in their own interests, naturally. When you have a lot of power,
Well, who doesn't?
you want to make those decisions to maintain that power. Otherwise, you don't have that power. It's that
doesn't?
simple.
yeah, which country hasn't?
The mafia is a club. Yeah.
You're saying it's the same.
It's like a mafia, yeah. And in fact, I'm glad you mentioned this. There was a case where our big friend, the United States, was compared to a mafia as well. Not only by authors like Noam Chomsky, very rightfully comparing it to that, but there was a general called General Smedley Butler.
Yeah, war's a racket.
Yeah, he wrote a book called War is a Racket. Now, General Smedley Butler he had numerous decorations as a general in the American Army. He was in the American, I think, Air Force, or I can't remember which army. He had all these medals. He was a war hero. He was, loved. But he came out with this book and he said, you know what? He said, Al Capone operated in 3 districts of Chicago. I operated on 3 continents. That's what he said. I operated on 3 continents. I was a muscle man for Wall Street. That's how he described himself. He wrote a whole memoir explaining how really the powers work. And it is, my friend, I'm sorry, but it's the great powers who behave like this. It's not Greece who generally behaves the way Britain does. It's generally the big countries at the top. India, Britain, Russia, maybe Pakistan, the United States.
So what
Let's
do you
not
want
forget
to
the United
happen?
States
What
is
do you
the
want to
undisputed
change,
hegemon.
Kyle? What do you want
There
to
is
change?
what I want to change is the political system, the way we make laws. Because the reason this happens is because we don't have a say over how the laws are made. If we had a real control over the way we make the decisions, this wouldn't happen. Right now, it's only a small elite who make the decisions.
Okay.
Sometimes they're not even in the country that they're controlling. Like the IMF, for example, will go into a country, give it a give it a loan to build structural
All right,
loans.
Kyle,
And then when they can't pay the loan back, when Kenya can't pay its loan back for, let's say, a dam or a big project,
let's cut
then
the
they have to
bullshit.
cut into
Let's
their
cut the bullshit.
then they have to
Let's
cut
go
into
to
their
the
healthcare
business.
services. They have to cut into their school services to pay for that.
Okay,
to
yes,
pay that
school
loan back.
services, blah, blah,
That's
blah.
how these countries
Kyle,
are kept
Kyle.
poor. Africa is a scar on the world's conscience, like Tony Blair said. Not by accident, though. It's not like been an accident. And I'm not just talking about what the colonial powers did in keeping Africa like that.
Let's
Today,
cut the bullshit.
today.
Kyle, let's cut the bullshit. Let me draw some parallels. You believe we, as the people here, don't have any power over
Never said that.
over the choices of the government, because the government is the one that chooses whatever they want because they are the mafia. You said that's the conclusion we all make from what you
That's
said.
exaggerating
But
my position. You're exaggerating
Kyle,
my
Kyle,
position.
Kyle, Kyle.
Should at least clarify.
He said the foreign.
It doesn't
Only
matter.
the foreign
It doesn't matter. It
policy.
doesn't matter. It
We
doesn't
don't
matter.
control the
It doesn't
foreign
matter.
policy.
If they are the mafia,
Before you
then
criticize,
we
you
have
should
to
understand.
No, listen.
Before you
listen,
should
Kyle.
criticize my position,
Okay,
you need to
what's
understand
the
it.
power we have? What's the power
British
we got?
people do have power. Ultimately,
Which is?
the power that Whitehall has is voluntarily given to them from us.
Lent for 5 years.
Exactly. Got to remember that. Power doesn't come out of nowhere. Power comes from British people voluntarily saying to the government, yes, go ahead, take it. Every 5 years they do it formally. It's the same in a dictatorship. It's just not formally done in a dictatorship. It's just taken.
They are somewhat accountable. They can't just do.
So that's why Britain is much better than most countries. It's
every
much more accountable to the British
And yet
public
people is
than
choosing,
say
people are choosing
Iraq.
the
But it's not a
wrong
comparison.
people in power.
Doesn't
Kyle, and yet Britain is choosing the wrong people in power. Is that what you're saying?
Not necessarily. I mean,
Not necessarily. So
No,
the
not
people right
necessarily.
now are the right people in power.
I'm not interested in who they're choosing. I'm interested in the way they're choosing, and in the fact that they're choosing at all. When they could have the power themselves.
That's crap.
Instead of choosing other people to have power for them.
You're not satisfied. You're not satisfied with what's going on now. Is that correct?
I'm not satisfied with the current political system. No.
Good.
I'd like to see a
Thank
real
you.
democracy.
Good. Let's stay with that. The people in Britain chose those people to rule them. Do you agree with that?
Yes and no. It's not as simple as you're making it out to be.
Okay. Why no?
For example, we didn't choose the head of Barclays Bank to be running one of the most powerful banks in the world.
No kidding.
We didn't choose the Exactly. Let's just narrow it down and just think in very conventional politics. Even on a conventional level, Britain's not really democratic. I mean, Boris
because
Johnson
it's
was
a
not
monarchy.
chosen by the British people. If that's your definition of democracy, choosing your leader, then we're not even democratic by that measure.
Yeah, it's a monarchy.
Mob rule.
Again, it's a monarchy. It's not a democracy.
Convince the largest number of people that the next guy coming in is the best one for them. And it doesn't matter how brain dead they are, they will vote for that person. So
Well,
it's mob rule democracy today. I'm afraid.
Democracy requires more than just voting, majority rule. Because you're right. Just because a majority of people are deciding something doesn't make it right. It could still be a bad decision.
But you want the
However-
people to choose, and yet you say that just because the majority says so doesn't make it right.
Not necessarily. For example, you might have a town which decides to kick out all the Muslims democratically. They might say we don't want any more Muslims in our town. That's a bad decision. If it means dispossessing Muslims of their homes and then they have to leave, then that's violating a basic human right, surely, the right to shelter. So on that front, I don't see that as fair. But now this gentleman's asking a question and he's not interested in hearing my answer, so I'm not going to follow up. Are there any other questions or any other?
And yet he says,
You guys are filming me, so maybe you want to ask a question. What are you filming for? Okay, man, don't worry.
To be educated better, there needs to be a structure educated. It's a closed circle.
Nice one.
Without exit.
I was just reading a book called Human Wrongs. I don't know if your channel is specifically interested in black issues. I'm not sure what your channel is, but I was quite interested to read that black men in Britain after the 2008 crisis, black men in Britain were far less likely to find a job than like a white guy with the same education. I think we've still got problems with racism. I mean, we talk about the police a lot in Britain. That's where a lot of this discussion of institutional racism is. But it's not just in the police. It goes right out across the society. There's even, I think, something like 8% of the British public don't like are actively racist to black people. It's not a huge amount of British people. That's quite a lot. 8%. That's like millions of people. So.
He's not giving any specific solutions. He's just saying,
Oh no, I
better.
I oppose what he stands for. You know? If what he stands for is a kind of sorry, do you guys mind? Sort of, I can't really hear. I'm trying to answer a question here.
Go ahead.
Well, if what Tommy Robinson stands for is nationalism, then I oppose what Tommy Robinson stands. I'm not a nationalist. Completely oppose nationalism.
Why?
Well, because I don't think that the human destiny of the human race is to be divided up into these arbitrary divisions of ethnicity, and we have far more in common with each other across national boundaries than what separates us.
Yeah, but humans were never united as one race. They were divided into different nations all throughout
Sorry,
history.
but by the fact of our biology, we are united as one race. We all have the
as
same
one species.
Do you know we all have the same ancestor in mitochondrial Eve
As one
in Africa?
species.
You know, I don't know if you guys know about this. In East Africa, we all have the same woman. We're all descended. We're literally brothers and sisters. I'm not
Wow,
religious.
that's bullshit.
I'm a complete atheist. But what these religious people at Speaker's Corner are saying is right. We're all brothers and sisters.
Carl, that's bullshit.
You know?
If we were all sons of the same woman, there would be so much inbreeding in our
I think
species at
you're
this
so
point.
literal-minded. You can't just
Kyle,
you can't just see what I'm
please,
saying.
Please,
Like,
please, don't take the piss now.
You're
Don't
being-
take the piss. If you say something, take responsibility for it. Don't
I
say,
know, but
"Oh, I was joking, I was joking."
you're
I know
doing
I
a
said something
completely-
stupid, but I was just joking. It was
you're doing a
just joke.
completely literal reading of what I'm saying.
Kyle,
I'm not-
come on.
okay.
You're trying to transmit a message. You can't say something stupid and then say it's a joke and then say, oh, it was on purpose, and be
All right,
taken
okay.
seriously.
All right.
What is your message? We all came from the same woman.
My message is that
About that.
in a globalized society where we have the internet and we have easy travel between countries, nations are no longer an appropriate way to organize human beings.
Why?
The appropriate way to see ourselves is as human brothers and sisters. That we
Says
have
who?
far more in common as human beings than what separates us. Yes, there are differences in skin color and
Says who?
gender and so on.
Says who?
But the
Who
real
defined that?
similarities are far more important. The degree to which we can say that we're a civilized society is the degree to which we can emphasize what we have in common as human beings. All of us have that same potential for rationality and reason and debate and dialogue. What's going on right now, exchanging ideas. No matter what skin color we have, background. I mean, of course we've got to pay attention to these things. The fact that you're a man or a woman is important. I've had to think about, even if you're like me, right, considered the least oppressed group of society, white, straight, middle-class male, right? You've still got huge issues to deal with as that group of people. Especially young white men, they've got a lot of challenges they're facing, So,
This is why I'm
But
a
the fact-
social democrat.
You're a
This is
social
why I'm a
democrat.
social
Good for you.
democrat and you're a Marxist.
I'm not a Marxist. You should know better than that. You should know much better than that.
What are you
Yeah.
then?
Do your homework,
You're
Sean
a
Connery.
socialist. You're a libertarian socialist.
That's right. Yeah.
You
Well,
admire Marx.
but Marx,
Both of them, you said.
Marx, when he was younger, was more of a libertarian. As he got older, he became more and more authoritarian. And I wonder if this is a common thing. When you get older,
Have
you
you
start
shifted to the right?
Yeah, I think this is what
General
happens.
election
Yeah.
now.
He in the right.
Do you know? You might be surprised
trying
to
to
find this out,
pretend he
Pablo. I used to be quite right wing when I was very young. I
Yeah, I
actually
believe
did.
you.
When the Iraq War started, I was quite in favour of it, and it took a lot of convincing by my brother to explain to me what the Iraq War was really
You mean
about.
inculcation?
It wasn't about protecting the nation and national security and British interests. No, it was about oil. Not just about oil. It was about sending a message to the rest of the world that who really runs the world.
It's not about the oil.
I was in
it's
favour
about
of the
sending
Iraq
a
War,
message.
but I got it wrong.
You know that reference?
Yeah, it's not about the. Is that Dark Knight?
No, yeah, it's from the Dark Knight.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's from the Dark Knight.
with them.
But he says.
See you later, man. See you. It was nice to talk to
Look,
you.
Kyle,
See ya.
just last thing. I'll just tell you
Yeah.
this one thing, then I'm gone. You can.
I want you to stay.
You can continue in peace. I won't disturb you anymore. Listen, Kyle. The ideology that we are all exactly the same, we all get along.
Why don't you get up on the ladder and
there
say
is-
this? Just the crowd. Tell
Okay, fine, fair enough. If you invite me, I'll go. Right. Thank you. Now the heckler has risen to the point of speaker. Right. I was saying the ideology that we're all exactly the same. There's absolutely no difference. We all will get along perfectly well if we just stop seeing these differences. Comes from a grievous misunderstanding of human nature. Humans have intrinsic qualities to their character, some of which are incompatible together. One person that might have one specific trait of character might not get along ever with another person that has a different character. I'll give you an example, for example. A tolerant person who tolerates everybody around them, who accepts everybody as they are, and an intolerant person who wants everybody to be just like themselves, who wants everybody to pursue the same ideology as themselves. Those two characters are completely incompatible because the tolerant one will tolerate the intolerant, but the intolerant will not answer with the same coin. He will not do the same thing. Humans are very different individually, but also in terms of society. Different societies and different countries automatically means different ideologies. Different countries have the tendency of having a different ideology, different cultures. It's all very, very different. It's a very complicated business to actually make those people get along. You can't just say, open borders, we all get along perfectly, it'll all be fine. It won't. Never, ever. You need to make very intelligent rules and very intelligent ways of organizing those people together.
You need to keep them all separate, maybe in different...
Not necessarily
maybe they
separate.
can sit on... Yeah, maybe separate bathrooms, separate graveyards, separate...
You see, again, listen, Kyle. That's the reason why there are borders. That's the reason why there are countries. You might notice throughout history that certain cultures spread where the climate is similar. That's because culture is bred by the climate.
Oh my God, are you really saying that?
I am saying that. I'm saying that. If you have anything against this, if you have any evidence,
Yeah, I'm interested.
look at history. Look at history. Every single.
How does history
No,
prove your
listen,
point?
Kyle. Every single empire of one culture bred into one specific climate that has spread throughout the world has had a lot of difficulties in keeping its grip in different climates. It happens every single time.
The British Empire was fine for about 200 years, so I don't think that's true.
Yeah, the British Empire was quite different because the British didn't really technically occupy. They basically had the client states. Most of their empire were client states.
The Romans never did that?
The Romans were the same climate, the Mediterranean climate. It was practically the same climate.
You had
Get out of here, man.
They were stretching
Get
all
out of
the
here
way
with the
from-
superior race.
They were stretching all the way from northern England down to Israel. So
what? It's a similar
completely
climate.
It's completely different.
Compared to the world, Europe is a small place. Very small place. And there are many examples of this throughout the world. All you have to do is look into history. And in history, there is not a single time that a civilized country was able to exist without any resemblance of borders, any resemblance of an actual identity, of a specified identity.
Muslim countries.
Sorry?
The Islamic countries.
You're joking, right? You're joking. Islam is one of the...
Indians, Mongol, Arabs, you've got Spanish,
Okay,
you've got, from North Africa. They work together, isn't it? So you're wrong.
Am
Keep
I?
going, yeah.
They had the same climate though.
Yeah, there's different climate as
all
well.
hot. It was
They
all
were
very hot.
different climate as well. So you're wrong.
If I'm not mistaken,
Indian is
if
different
I'm
than
not
North
mistaken,
Africa.
they're not all the same kind of Muslims.
This is different issue.
No, but listen. Now I'm going to use the argument that Muslims use on the people who critique Islam, which is not all Muslims are the same.
We're talking about individuals.
It's not only about religion. It's about no. You started about Islam. Now let's continue about Islam. No. You are the one who brought the conversation to Islam. Islam is very much linked to Arabic culture. Arabia is where Islam began.
Your opinion, anyway. Yeah.
But it doesn't mean Islam is always only linked to our Arabic culture. Indonesia has a very different culture to Arabic culture, and they're Muslims.
Yeah.
It's the biggest Muslim
What's up
country
with
in
that?
the world, right?
The biggest population,
Yeah,
the biggest population
Muslims.
in Indonesia. That's true. Albania. Yeah, of course.
Like
Well,
Africa.
Middle East depends on what you consider Middle East. Do you consider Turkey Middle East? Do you consider let's say Pakistan Middle East? You see, many people consider it Middle East.
Central Asia.
Okay, what do you consider Middle East? Do you consider the Fertile Crescent as Middle East? Just
What
Arabia.
about Iran? Surely. Iran is about as Middle Eastern as it gets.
Some people say North Africa is
They were
Middle East.
active, like
the peak of it, the Persian Empire was so big. They are not Middle Eastern.
Anyway, right, let me give you examples of an empire who was able... the good thing about Islam is that they didn't immediately, even though many people will say so, they didn't immediately try to impose their own culture on the people they conquered. The Muslims, they accepted the Roman coins, the denarii, as their own. They started coining the Roman coins because they didn't have a very developed coinage system before they conquered the Romans and the Sassanids.
They didn't even have writing.
Yeah, they didn't really have a lot of writing. That's why the Quran only was written after the death of Muhammad, only eventually after the death of Muhammad. But either way, my point here is the ideology of all of us are equal, all of us just should unite. It doesn't function. It does sound very good. It does sound very nice, but it will not work. It will create more problems than it will solve. There is, sorry. Oh, definitely, obviously, I am a fascist. You see, I see how you would.
When you say we're not equal,
So there was one thing that
Any sense, both individually, culturally, in terms of ideology. There's a lot of differences to think.
when you say we're not equal, are they human beings or as a cultural aspect or as a geographical?
Well, obviously, we're all humans.
We are all equal as a human.
Well, yeah, as human species, yeah. As human species, but look.
From different mothers.
Huh?
Different mothers.
Yes, different mother, different upbringing, different culture, different ideology, a different way of living, different everything basically, but the fact that we're human. That's why I think we should at least give consideration to other culture, to see what we have to gain from them, to see the good things, the bad things, to be able to criticize. And in our culture as well. I mean, our culture. I'm speaking about my culture. My culture is not necessarily the Western culture. I'm from Ukraine. I lived in Portugal most of my life. Now I'm living here. I take the best parts of all the cultures that I've been exposed to, and I try to unite them together into something better. That's not what he said. That's not what he said. No. I criticize both. There are flaws intrinsic to humanity. There are flaws that happen in every single culture. Without any, and it doesn't. Sometimes it doesn't matter which culture they are. The same flaws sometimes can be noticed in different empires. All empires, the cycle goes like this: strong men build empires. Empires create good times. Good times create weak men. Weak men destroy the good times, which makes bad times, and bad times create strong men. And then it begins again and again and again and again. The cycle keeps repeating itself over and over. Where's the guy? Where's the guy who asked me if I'm a fascist? I actually wanted to speak to him, but I guess he left. Where is he? No, I don't see him.
Can you make your conclusion, your point? That what
No, my conclusion is that the ideology of everybody's equal, everybody gets along great, just open the borders, doesn't work.
That is such a straw man.
What straw man, man?
I never said everyone gets along, everyone's equal.
Oh, come on. Are you for or against open borders?
In the very long term, yes. In the short term, no.
Oh, in the long term.
Yeah,
So
in the long
eventually it will happen. Okay.
In the long term, but right now, I don't think we're ready for it. But in the long term,
Okay.
yes.
Now let's define borders. Do you mean borders in terms of states, countries, laws, religions, or border of your
I would
home?
like to see that all states dissolve eventually.
You want to see all states
no,
dissolve?
Eventually, in the long term.
Do you want there to be one culture?
Well, human beings are already one culture.
No, they're not.
No, but we already are.
No, they're not. That's bullshit.
It's American culture, man.
Customs,
we all
laws,
live in America.
ideology, religion. Huh?
I'm sorry.
Yes.
What
Way of
TV
life.
shows that British people watch? They're not
One.
watching mostly British TV shows. They're watching American shows.
We're one species.
We're all living in the American empire. I'm sorry. Even North Koreans are living.
Listen, you guys, what if I told you guys that you have a much more totalitarian worldview than I do? What if I told you that? You have a much more right-wing worldview than I do at this point.
Explain yourself. Come on.
Let me explain myself. Because it was the right-wingers, the far right, that believed that everybody should have the same culture.
No.
That everybody is the same culture.
Not that
I don't believe in that. I believe in different culture. I believe that there are things to gain in keeping different cultures in existence.
they wanted the same race. Their race, they thought their race is
Yeah, specifically the Nazis did. Specifically the Nazis.
They wanted, you said that they wanted everybody to be the same culture.
Yeah, they did.
No, because a black doesn't look like a blonde white man. So how can you? They specifically said our race, the eyes, the hair, our color of skin. This is the highest, or this is.
Okay, so what's the difference between the Germans, the Nazis, and the German Jews? What's the difference?
Are you really making an equivalence?
Oh my God. Did the Jews wanted the same?
Sorry?
Did the Jews wanted the same?
No! What's the difference between them? Ideology is the difference between them. They're the same race. That's what I want to hear from you. They're the same. Yeah, they are the same race.
Jews are Semitic.
Okay, let's talk about the Jews. Let's talk about the Jews. The Jews are a very funny case because there is not one hardwired existing Jewish race. It also depends on race, but how do you become a Jew? Now, I spoke with many Jews about this. You have to convert to Judaism to become a Jew.
You cannot convert to Judaism.
Yes, you can. Yes, you can.
Citizen.
Yes, you can. If a rabbi converts you to Judaism, you become a Jew. Simple as that.
Second-class citizen.
No. Wrong. You don't know. I spoke with actual rabbis, with actual Jews about this, and all of them say the same. All it takes is for a rabbi to find you worthy to join Judaism, to convert to Judaism, and for a rabbi to convert you to Judaism.
You can put it that way. It's harder to become a Jew.
Yeah, it's harder than with other religions. Yeah, but you can become a Jew. It's not that hard.
As long as you agree with it.
Anyway, carry on.
True. Anyway, how do you remain a Jew? If imagine, okay, wait, calm down. If you have a child, which is a daughter, for example, and that child has another child, even if your daughter stopped believing in Yahweh, even if she stopped being a Jew religiously, that child is still considered a Jew, because that child is the child of a Jewish mother. So Judaism is not only religious, it's also in terms of genetics, in terms of race, exactly. But it doesn't all come from the same race. It can be converted, which means that a race that has nothing to do with the Jewish race converts to Judaism and then has children. Those children are considered racially Jewish. That's why Jews are a very specific case. They're a very interesting case in terms of geopolitics overall, in terms of their racial structure. You know what I mean? I can't hear you.
What will that kid do in later life, grown up, inside
Who? A Jew who stops believing in Judaism? Okay, if it's that's the quirk about Judaism. If you're a father, listen. If you're a father and you stop and you marry like a non-Jewish woman, it doesn't matter if you believe in Judaism or not. No, wait. Let me finish. This is listen. This isn't. Wait. You showed an interesting part of this whole equation of becoming a Jew. Now let me explain it to you. If you're a Jew, like I'm a Jew, for example. Imagine that I'm a Jew. I'm not a Jew, but imagine that I'm Jewish, and I have a child, and I with a non-Jew, with a woman that's not she's not Jewish. You know what I mean? I'm a Jewish person. The woman is not a Jewish person. We have a child. As long as the child is not baptized by the rabbi, the child is not Jewish. The child stops believing in Judaism. They're still a Jew. They're still considered a Jew by the rabbis and by the Jewish community. It doesn't matter what they consider. They are considered as Jews by their community. You know what I mean? Oh, it does matter.
No, I'm not a scholar.
No, it does matter. It does matter. You can ask any Jew that you want. I've actually researched into this, so I know how the process functions. And it's not the same as anything in other cultures. It's something very unique to Judaism. But anyway, what I was saying is basically, look, just to wrap this up, because I've been speaking here for a very long time. Huh? Why what?
Why are you talking about borders?
Why am I talking about borders?
Yeah, are you
Why?
You asked me if I was for and against borders. What about you? Are you against borders or for borders?
I'm for borders.
For borders?
Yes.
Okay. What about within state? I'm from South Africa, and there are a lot of borders within the state as well. Do you think we should have, Muslim-only toilets? And... No, seriously, man. How far are you willing to go with borders?
Well, it depends.
Okay.
It depends on the situation. Imagine that the Muslims want to be separated. Imagine that they don't want to be with the other people. Like, what's going on in Pakistan. There's an Indian community in Pakistan and there's a Muslim community in India. So there's a problem. Like the Hindus in Pakistan, they want to be with other Hindus. They don't want to be with other Muslims. And the Muslims in India, they want to be with other Muslims.
Muslims are Indian, it's really Indian citizens, and they want to live in India. That's not right. It doesn't even know about
I never said that they're not. I never said they're not. I'm just saying that they want to be with other
How do you
movements.
know that?
They feel
Have they done
disenfranchised.
opinion polls? Have they studied what they've
It's not. It has nothing to do with opinion
Why do you
polls.
assume just
It's
because
a very
someone's-
problematic
why do you
region.
assume just because someone's a Hindu they want to live in India?
Huh?
Why, or just because they're a Muslim they want to live in Pakistan?
Well, because if you have a certain, imagine you.
Why do you assume that?
Okay. Why do you assume that?
You know there are more Muslims in
Kyle.
India than Pakistan. Do you know that?
Kyle, you are. Kyle, you are a mild socialist. Is that correct?
No, I'm an incredibly radical, revolutionary socialist. I'm like further to the left than
Okay, you're a socialist, are you?
Lenin, yeah.
Are you a socialist? Okay, good. Would you feel well? Would you feel good if you had to live with Nazis?
I don't think anyone would. No, but that's not the same.
A Nazi would. If a Nazi lived with other Nazis, he would feel good with living in the
I
world with
wouldn't want to
Nazis.
live with them, but I wouldn't want there to be a border between us. Like, I wouldn't want them to have their schools they go to, and I go to a separate school, and I go to certain universities, and I go to like it was in South Africa. When black people would go to one place, and white people go to another.
Don't turn it into race. It's more about ideology than
whatever.
race.
Do you know borders make what they call it, families separate? Do you know that?
What?
My family, some of them based in Ethiopia, who divide them is the British Empire.
So, what does it have with the conversation?
what do you think about the borders that the
What does it
British
have to do?
Borders, who drew up the borders?
Who drew the borders?
It's people like you.
It's imperialists
from
like
your
you,
background.
Huh?
Academics like you, neoconservatives.
Neoconservatives?
Yes,
It's fact. It's fact.
I know you.
No, bro, it's not
I
fact.
know you, bro.
It's not fact. I'll tell you who draws the borders. The one who wins draws the borders.
No,
And that makes
Yes,
it okay.
yes.
That makes the border right. Just because you
That's
want-
why the borders are so fucked up in that. No. Wait. I know this hurts. I know this hurts you. I know it. You know, it blows a hole in here. It blows a hole. What I'm saying.
It doesn't justify.
But
Socialism, it's a fact.
Calm down,
Socialism
calm down,
bought by
calm down.
who? The British Empire.
exactly because the British won.
No, they never.
They had the
Does
power
that make it
to
okay?
draw the borders.
Does that make it okay?
No, it doesn't.
So there, just say it. Say it. If you're
Kyle,
against
just speak.
imperialism, say
Listen.
it.
Without
don't
Russia,
surround it.
you would not win the Second
Oh,
World
yeah,
War.
You can't take it. You can't take it.
Without
You can't
Russia,
take
you would not win the Second
it.
World
You
War.
can't take it. You can't
Look at
take
history.
it. You simply can't take
Without
it.
Russia,
You
would
can't
not win
bear
the
to
Second World
listen.
War. It's a fact.
I may challenge you on something.
How
Go
many
ahead.
million Russian soldiers died in the Second World
A
War?
moment ago,
These people do nothing about history.
or Nazis, like
And then they make lies about the Holocaust. How many died in the Holocaust?
You said 3 million.
I don't know. It's
Now,
open to
my
question.
view is this, that within all sections of, now for example, let's take the Labour Party, for example.
Yep.
They don't all condone the actions of Jeremy Corbyn. Feminists don't like each other, terrorists, because they feel they're competing with each other. I'm not saying that some are not united, and I think the same is applicable to Nazis or all groups that elect themselves as groups. For example, I understand you're from Ukraine and you're not particularly keen on the Russians, but that would not be representative of every Ukrainian point of view.
I'm not particularly keen on the Russians.
What I heard. Some propaganda.
He's just
Not
keen
quite
on
true.
Britain.
Not quite true. I'm not.
He's just not keen on Putin.
You're a very bad man.
Okay, so either I like the Russians or I hate the Russians. There's nothing else.
We're not talking about ordinary Russian, the policy of Russian government.
Yes, I don't like the policies. That's it. That is it. That is what I think. I don't like the policies of the Russian government because Russia is this. No. I heard what he was saying. I didn't. That's all I heard. I didn't assume anything. Either way, an empire that practices dysfunctional laws is not a beneficial empire. I'm not going to defend the borders that were made to weaken a country. I'm not going to defend that. But borders are useful in some cases, when in others they can be used to spread the unrest. Like it was used in Africa. They joined different tribes that hated each other into one country, and then there's internal war. So what do you expect? The borders were made with specifically that purpose, to destabilize. Obviously it's not something good there.
You know about the British politics and the borders are no good. Sorry, just 1 second.
You see, this is the problem with the conversation. You guys come from the assumption either borders are good or borders are bad. You can't reason you can't reason yourself into the answer that borders, if used correctly, can be good, and if used in a wrong way, can be bad.
Can I get up and answer this?
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry. Yeah. I think borders are great on some things.
Oh, now you think they're great.
No, on some things. On definition. There needs to be structure and order. I mean, there's all these refugees who are coming to Britain, trying to escape, let's say, what's happening in Syria or in Sudan or one of these places, and they come into Britain because of its borders. So it's hard to get past the borders, especially now Boris Johnson's being even more of a heartless bastard about it. But once they get there, that border provides protection. I believe in definition and structure and order, I really do. So I see where that's coming from. However, to say that human destiny lies in continuing to be in all these scattered nations, divided up, just doesn't seem right to me. I mean, there's been a strong tradition, especially in the European tradition of like revolutions, to be like outward looking, not just looking at your own nation and trying to make your own nation great, but looking at the whole world. You know, that sort of great respect for the opinions of mankind as a whole. That's what George Washington described it as when he kicked out the British Empire from America. He said, doing this out of a decent respect for the opinions of mankind. Thomas Paine was completely behind that. Thomas Paine, the great English revolutionary, who took part in the French and the American Revolution, said, and I like this quote, he says, "The world is my country, and my religion is to do good." If you're going to live by any philosophy, and how you treat so-called foreigners, then that's a pretty good one.
Practically, how can you solve that problem to remove borders?
It's not. You don't try and get rid of difference. Difference is fine. I think London is a beautiful mosaic of lots of different cultures. It's fantastic. It's a great privilege to live in a cosmopolitan environment. Different languages.
Have a natural tendency, unfortunately,
Does that mean you shouldn't be?
ideologically to not accept outside.
Does that mean you shouldn't be?
No, that doesn't mean we shouldn't, but we have to accept that not all cultures are
Sure.
cosmopolitan.
Just because you have some nationalists around and people who are
Why are you
not.
pointing at me?
Well, you're like the most nationalist person at Speaker's
What?
Corner,
Of
for
who?
sure.
Of what country? No, I'm not. How am I a nationalist? I live in a foreign country. I didn't participate in the war. I'm not doing anything for Ukraine.
Okay, you're not
How
a.
am
I never said you were. I never said you were a
British.
British patriot. I never said you were a. I never said you get emotional every time you look at the Union Jack. That's not what I said.
Oh yeah.
I said you're a Ukrainian nationalist. You said
No,
this to
I'm
me.
not.
Yeah, you have said this to me. I asked you, what do you think of Ukrainian
What am
nationalism?
I doing for Ukraine?
You don't have to do anything
Yeah,
for
you
a country
do.
to be a nationalist.
Yes,
no,
you do.
of course not.
Okay,
Nationalism
then you're
is a state of mind.
Okay, listen, Kyle.
It's not a.
Okay, listen. I'm a professor because I call myself a professor. I never teach anybody. I don't know how to teach anybody, but I call myself a professor. That's your parallelism that you're doing, that you're drawing. I don't help Ukraine in any way. I don't work for Ukraine. I don't contribute to Ukraine, but I'm a nationalist.
It's a state of mind. Nationalism is an
Kyle,
ideology.
Please,
it's not a.
please get out of here.
You don't
with
have
that.
to. You don't have to do
Get out
anything to
of
be a
here with that.
nationalist.
Then you're a
You don't
fake
have to.
nationalist, only in name. I can call
Yeah,
myself King of England. What does it change? It's the mindset. Then I go to the loony bin, to the madhouse.
Not necessarily.
It's a mad state of mind. I don't consider myself a nationalist.
It's fine by you. In my opinion, it's an ism.
Well, it's a wrong opinion.
Isms belong in the human mind. They don't belong out in reality. They're maps of meaning in our
That's
heads.
the reason. That's
that
the
help
point.
us to negotiate.
You're not linked to reality. You're linked to your own ideology, and your ideology is not compatible with reality. That's the disagreement.
No, we can have a debate on that. I'm happy to do that. But let's just separate ideologies
Okay,
from
go ahead,
reality.
go ahead.
That's why I say nationalism is
Fair
not
enough.
necessarily like you don't have to be fighting in a war or doing anything for a country to be a nationalist. You might need to do that to be a good nationalist or a successful nationalist. But a nationalist is just a state of mind.
I mean,
Britishness just exists in a state of mind. It doesn't exist every time you drink a cup of tea or play a game of cricket. That's not how Britishness works. It's completely inside your mind. It's completely inside your head. And I think it's a total illusion. I mean, like, look at British history, for example. We came together as a country. England, I'm just looking at England specifically. We came together through violence from above. Like the average Anglo-Saxon in the 8th, 9th century was not interested in creating a unified England. It was King Alfred who wanted to do that. It's always top-down. Nations are always top-down creations. It was English kings who created England, not the English people. The average Anglo-Saxon was just trying to mind his own business, but he was being drafted into armies to go and fight against the other kingdoms. But I'm talking about the time when Britain was divided into 7 different countries. You know, you had Wessex and you know, all these different Northumbria, all these different places.
yeah.
I'm going far back in time because it allows us to have that separation. It's quite hard to talk about nationalism because it gets very emotional, and so to have a separation in time, to look back at your early history is very helpful. Yeah, these are all figments of our imagination, these nations. They don't really exist.
Yeah, but they're useful.
They're useful to the people in power. I agree with Eric Hobsbawm on this.
Yes,
They're useful for the people in power. For the Ukrainian elite and the British elite, it is very useful to have people like you and me, less interested in what we have in common, but more interested in what separates us as a Ukrainian and a British person. That the British elite are fine with that. They're happy with that. And interestingly, they themselves don't really have much allegiance to the British people themselves. They're much more interested in their little class of Brits. They just realise it's a very good way to get people to go and fight and die in wars, to work for a supposed idea of national interest. That's their notion of nationalism.
Why do people root for teams, for football teams?
Well, that's the thing. We have this tendency to create in-groups and out-groups. It's there. I've seen it throughout history. It's not necessary, though. It's not always been like this. And now,
it has.
in the age of nuclear weapons, there can be no in-group and out-group. We have to all be the in-group as a society. If we don't rally together and deal with climate change, nuclear weapons, all the big national issues, then we're going to be done for. We have to create a global consciousness. Otherwise, we're going to be done for. Sorry, what were you going to ask, my friends?
I've listened for a few minutes now. I see the difference between having borders or not. They're useful for dividing up peoples who might share different values or different laws. Now, when certain countries are very close and their values are quite similar, it's very easy to kind of... I'm Irish, for example. I love this.
You didn't have to tell me. Which kind of Irish are you?
Dublin Southern.
Okay, I thought you were, yeah. That's what I thought.
But it's very easy for me to travel here and to share the same values and have the same, and feel like, oh, this is lovely, traveling here, Scotland, England, Wales, or even France or whatever. But what I see is that when there's different laws or different traditions or different customs that are in direct conflict, that might be to do with marriage, that might do with abortion, that might to do with rights, or that might to do with welfare or whatever.
Can I ask you what you think of the hard border, the possibility there might be a hard border now?
Well, that would be awful, for the reason that I know it would cause more troubles than there has been. But that's a very complicated special case.
Okay, all right. But in general, you think it's a good idea to have some structure?
It's very easy to have that feeling within Europe, which is why their values are so overlapped and the history is so close together. But there's other cultures in other parts of the world which are drastically different, and they might think something is completely right, and I might see something that's completely wrong. And how are we meant to both put together? What do we go with? And, if we completely disagree on it, I think it's
very different.
It's a
difficult.
nice idea to think we'll all live in harmony, but the person right here is doing something I think is awful. I can't just say, oh, live and let live.
Exactly.
Like slavery, back in the States. Oh, this is grand. You do slavery, that's okay. I don't believe in slavery, I won't. No, they had a big war.
This is where human rights comes in. Human right, no matter where you are, no matter what planet you're on, human rights apply. If you're a human being, they naturally inhere inside your body.
That with a lot of countries that don't believe in the same human rights.
So human rights don't care about whether the country believes in it. No, we don't.
Human rights were created by certain countries. Why does everybody have to abide by the same laws?
Countries. Just because.
Huh?
Everybody has to have human rights.
Yeah.
Yeah, but human rights were defined by certain people. Not everybody agreed with human rights.
They exist independent of whether we define them or not.
Listen, my point is...
Human rights exist whether we define them or not. They just exist.
Calm down. You're very worked up. Now you're calling me a racialist.
I think you
when
guys
did I
have
speak
sex
about
with each
race,
other.
about the superiority of races?
I think there's some real sexual tension going on here.
What select few? When did I say that?
Robert,
no,
can you
I
calm
didn't.
these two down? Try and keep these two like...
Get the wax out of the ears.
About borders.
How do you deal with that thing when there's
So it's very tricky, yeah. Well, this is where I say, how do you deal with it?
Change because they think it's right and morally right, and the other ones think the opposite.
So there are lots of ways you can resolve conflict without violence. Many, many ways. In fact, violence is should be a last resort, really.
Without a tyranny of the majority situation.
Tyranny of a majority is only a problem. I.e., this is a very right way of describing democracy, by the way. This is what the founding fathers of America described.
You said it yourself that the majority
but a
can't
tyranny
always
of majority.
be trusted.
I'm trying to answer this question.
Okay, go ahead.
Just hold on.
Sorry.
I'll answer your question.
Go ahead.
A second. Tyranny of majority is when you don't give the minority a chance to argue their case back. Being a minority is fine. Being a minority on an issue like I'm a minority on the issue of abortion, for example, that's fine. I just know that if I have free speech, I can make my case to the public and then try and win them over time. If you're given that time, you got to see democracy as a developmental process. Good ideas start out as the purview of a small group of people, a sort of vanguard of people. For example, the idea of, let's say the idea that women should have the vote started out as a tiny group of women, but then it naturally spread out, and now it's just taken as a given. No one questions that anymore. It's just part of the oxygen we breathe. It's part of the political oxygen of this country. So, I said this country. I didn't say other countries.
We should have a border between this country and any country that believes that.
No, not necessarily. Well, that's just how it is right now. Whether I like it or not, that's just how it is. Now, how to overcome the problem of different nations having different values and different, and this goes back to what you said at the beginning of your speech as well. Human rights is absolutely fundamental here. I come back to this because this is exactly what is required to overcome that difference. When there's a mutual respect for an objective measure of what makes a successful life for a human being, having food, water, electricity, having access to education, having access to healthcare, when these are seen as the objective life ground, I mean, there's no religion on this planet that says that, shelter is a bad idea, that you shouldn't have shelter. For me, this is the objective basis for a moral philosophy. Human rights. If you really value that, it doesn't matter how you define them. They're there, and they're just there to be discovered. You've got to discover them.
Religions have to sound good to be practiced by
I'm just continuing to answer the question. Now, there are ways you resolve conflict without violence. You have non-violent action. Non-violent action could be strikes, civil disobedience, boycotts. It's a form of warfare, actually. It's just not using guns and pistols and bullets. You can use non-violent action. That's and in some cases it's called civilian-based defense. When you use civilians
but look, it only
to defend the
works
country.
as long as the country gives you the freedom to make it work.
I'll give you another example. Principled negotiation. There's a style of negotiation being developed by a very interesting book called Getting to Yes. It's all about how you can use objective standards of criteria of success to get somewhere in negotiations. It doesn't have to be hard bargaining. There are ways you can, and non-violent communication as well. I've been reading a fantastic book about non-violent communication by an author called Marshall Rosenberg. Describes how we meet our needs together. So we meet our needs together. It's not a competition. There are ways, we all have the same basic human needs. Let's recognize that as human beings. We all want compassion, empathy, respect, food, water. Same with human rights. Same human rights we all have.
That's not to say that everyone wants the same.
You can communicate that.
Exactly.
It's absolutely not. It's just completely ridiculous. So, I don't know, think of like FGM, for example. In some countries that's really important.
That's not a human need. FGM is not a human need.
Well, I'm just saying.
Some people say
it sounds like
FGM is a particular strategy for meeting a human need.
You get to decide what is a human need.
FGM is a specific strategy for meeting a human need. All right, it's a terrible, terrible strategy. There doesn't even need to be a question about that, I think. But it's a way of trying to do that. Let's not conflate ways with ends. That's ethical thinking.
You get to decide what is and what isn't is based on.
I don't decide. I don't decide. Human rights decides.
So you only understand human rights by predefining.
So what? No, it's not. It's predefined a priori.
70 years ago.
Sorry?
Human rights were just defined.
So what? You're not one of these people who surely believes that since the idea of scrofula never existed in the time of Tutankhamun, that Tutankhamun couldn't have possibly died of scrofula. That just doesn't make any sense. Just because the Nazis were not aware of human rights, or let's say just because human rights were not discussed 100 years ago, doesn't mean that human rights didn't exist. They still existed.
They were aware, they just didn't care. They had a different ideology to that.
I never said no one was aware of them. Of course, they were being articulated, but they weren't widely adopted. There was no wide adoption.
Adopted in Western countries or Western values. It kind of sounds like if you kind of leave it long enough, eventually everyone will gravitate towards Western values and Western ideas.
It's not a particular. Human rights are not a particularly Western value.
Because there's some completely different.
I'm sorry, I'm going to say this again. Human rights are not a particularly Western value. I mean, for example, in Hinduism, you've got this idea of the Atman, the soul that exists in every human being, regardless of their religion or their race or their color or anything. And that soul has the same human needs regardless. It's part of that life spirit, that God. That's the idea of human rights. It doesn't come from the West. And also, let's just talk about how much does the West really value human rights. I mean, just take a look at a book like Cruel Britannia for a second, written by Ian Cobain. It's gone through and documented the British government's involvement in torture and rendition in places like Northern Ireland, in places like Afghanistan. Are human rights really a factor there? Were human rights a factor when the UK invaded Iraq illegally? Absolute contravention of international human rights law. What about drone bombings? The British government doesn't even respect the rights of British citizens. Those British citizens who are fighting in places like Afghanistan and Pakistan, they're British citizens being bombed by drones without any due process, being assassinated, right?
The point was always specifically about values and laws, as opposed to human rights. I guess that's the kind of.
It's good you define them because human rights don't depend on values. They are a value that goes beyond specific circumstances.
Get away from that because the opening was about how do you reconcile the difference between when different countries have completely opposing values and laws. You have to kind of pick one.
Another way I didn't mention is just dialogue. What we're doing right now. That's a way to do it. Dialogue. Like, listen, you and I are not that
but if
different.
one side refuses,
You are not
all
that,
the
you and I are
dialogue
not that
collapses.
different. We're just by looking at you and talking. Okay, we're different on that, but that's.
I don't believe in abortion.
Oh, you don't? Okay, I don't either. So there we go. We're almost similar. However, even dialogues between people are very similar. Can overcome the differences they may have, even the small differences we might have. Dialogue is exactly the thing that's required to reconcile all the different values, national identities, national allegiances, racial groups, all the rest of it. It's dialogue. And the thing is, we're not really given a chance to do that. Speaker's Corner is an informal place to do that. You come here for an afternoon, you have a chat about politics, you might learn something, and then maybe that ripples out. You start to talk about that with your family and friends, that idea, and then the idea starts to spread. Speaker's Corner is great because you can see people's body language and what their intentions are when they're asking a question. Yeah, exactly. So if you're answering a question like that, then I might see it differently. You can't really do that through Facebook. That's why Speaker's Corner is so valuable. We need more Speaker's Corners. It's such a shame that this is the only really fully functioning Speaker's Corner. Social media is not only a drag on Speaker's Corner, it's a drag on public debate in general. Social media is killing Speaker's Corner. I don't know how interested any of you are in this, but if anybody here is a regular at this place, I'll just say to you, let's try and take Speaker's Corner back to Hyde Park and away from Facebook. A lot of the crime that's been happening at Speaker's Corner has been happening because of stuff that happens on Facebook. People get angry and they get worked up, and they don't have that chance to see their body language and have that compassion and empathy, which you can only have face to face. They don't have that chance to do that. So that's my basic answer in a nutshell. This gentleman asked in the audience, how do we reconcile national differences when some groups have different values to others, sometimes radically different? And I say the only way is through dialogue, through non-violent, peaceful dialogue. There's just no other way. That's exactly how England and France managed to create a peace, a relative peace today. Britain and France are still great rivals today in the world, despite what the cameras might show us. They're still, behind closed doors, they have rivalrous tensions. Same with Germany and all the other countries. But I mean, we're nothing like we were in World War II, are we? We're nothing like we were in the 100 Years' War, when British, basically terrorists were going over to France and devastating whole villages and towns in the name of God, in the name of King Harry.
Worst understanding of 100 Years' War.
Okay, you might say it is a bad understanding.
Joan of Arc was killing the English in the name of God.
She was killing the English as well. She was doing it in the name of God, we were doing it in the name of God. No. How far have we advanced since then? Remarkably well. Look what's happened in Ireland. I mean, like, the relationship between Britain and Ireland is fantastic now, compared to how it was, say, in the 70s or 80s. I mean, but like young Irish people today, probably like you, they don't care about the Troubles anymore. They're not interested. They just don't want to.
In history.
The trouble. I'm talking about the dirty war that the British fought against Northern Ireland. Really, the Catholics in Northern Ireland.
Oh, okay.
And that was where there was real torture going on. I mean, you had people being interned, Catholics being interned in prisons in Northern Ireland, without any charge, without any respect for habeas corpus.
Yeah, and there were Protestants being exterminated in Germany, France, and other countries.
We hear a lot about the IRA, but what about the UVF and a lot of the terrorist groups that were backed by Britain? There was groups of men going around in balaclavas and baseball bats, not baseball bats, probably crowbars and clubs, beating people to death, going into the Republic as well, trailblazing right the way through.
What's your point?
I'm saying this is a sort of suppressed aspect of the relationship with Ireland, which is not discussed. How we see the conflict in Ireland is a kind of conflict between Catholics and Protestants. That's a superficial understanding. Then somebody who's a bit more educated might see it as, okay, it's not really about religion, it's more about economics. You have the Northern Ireland, which is it was sort of overdeveloped by the UK, had all this industry, and then the rest of Ireland was left to be rural and agricultural. That's maybe where the divisions come from. But then they never mentioned that there's really a third force in the conflict. The British Army was a major factor in the Troubles. I mean, it was like actively taking sides and promoting the loyalist groups against Catholic soldiers.
Of course, they were promoting their own side.
Right, they value the Union. They value the Union above any human life. They wanted to keep the Union together. They wanted to keep Northern Ireland as part of. I talk about nationalism. When Northern Irish people say that they're British, I think it's just a way of just saying that they're not Irish. That's really their way of saying it. It's not. They've got far more in common with the average Irish person than they do with, say, someone like me. Yeah.
You can identify with either. You can get a passport.
Exactly. Yeah. So this is what I mean about these illusions. These sort of. I mean, that's a wonderful thing about Speaker's Corner as well. By exchanging ideas in the way we're doing, we start to gently chip away.
What? I gotta go.
Take care, man. See you. Bye. It's nice chatting, man. Take it easy. Nice to speak to you as well. Yeah, I mean, all these nations are just illusions. I'm sorry.
Man.
I mean, humans are a fact. Humanity is a fact. the idea of universalism and internationalism makes much more sense to me. It's a much more helpful map of way of understanding the world. Especially in the age of the internet, where I could debate with anybody on any topic around the world at any time.
Kyle, do you believe in the necessity of the structure of power?
Of course I believe. I don't think power is a bad thing. Power is a good thing. It's just that too few people have too much power. That's my issue with power. I'm not one of these anarchists who wants to get rid of power. You hear this absurd notion from anarchists, sometimes at Speaker's Corner, sometimes in anarchist magazines, saying we got to get rid of power.
So you want a democratic
it's like saying we
republic?
got to get rid of gravity. It just doesn't make any sense.
Do you want to have a democratic
The question
republic?
is, how do you give people democratic power, the British people as a whole? I don't believe in the British nation. I believe in the British people, though, definitely, having power. That makes sense to me.
Do you want a democratic republic?
Yeah, not a republic.
Why not?
I'm not going to repeat, because, you know, I've actually had this conversation with you 5 times, 6 times now, where I've differentiated.
Oh, you've counted.
I'm happy to do it for the benefit of everyone else, but you've heard me enough times now. You've got to pay attention this time.
Okay.
There's a difference between a democracy and a republic.
I know.
Do I have to tell you again?
No, I know the difference.
So why are we doing this? Why is Speaker's Corner like this? Why do we come and recite the same thing again?
Okay,
and
you
again?
don't have to recite it. Forget about it.
He just
It's
wants someone
that
to talk to. He's lonely.
It doesn't make a lot of sense, but anyway, it's fine.
Well, there's a difference. I want to talk about it. I know you're going to get bored and you're going to walk away. But democracy
Well, I
and
haven't
republic
walked
are two
away
different
yet,
things. A democracy, in my opinion, is not just when you elect someone every 5 years to make decisions. It's when you make the decisions yourself. A republic is when you elect someone to do the decisions for you. That's it in a nutshell. One is the Roman model and one is the Greek model. I just say we've got to go back to the Greeks. The Greeks had a much better idea of it. Yes, they kept women as, you know, servants and they had slaves, but we could just leave that stuff and have the rest.
You know what, you should let him back up for a little while.
Yeah, good idea.
In a way, he winds people up, so you're good at
It's a good idea.
That's
All
what
right,
you do.
Pavlov, would you like to get back
Oh,
up?
thank
and
you,
speak?
thank you.
Come on,
Of
get up and
course,
speak.
of course. Always. Thank you.
Get good banter, you
I've got people requesting me. Thank you. Feels great. Anyway, yeah, about republic and democracy. Like the ring?
Yes.
15 euros.
Can I kiss it?
Yes, my son. Anyway, what I was saying. Yeah, republic and democracy. Well, if you go for the first democracy, yeah, the Greek democracy. And yeah, you're saying that you want to keep the part where the citizens choose what has to be done, but you don't want to keep the part where women are not citizens and slaves are not citizens and artisans are not citizens and foreigners are not citizens and some more people are not citizens, basically. So only like maybe 5% of the population are citizens. Well, maybe 10. In terms of Athens, it was like 10, 20.
It was 40,000 men out of 150,000 who were citizens.
Where? In Athens?
Yeah.
In Athens. In Sparta it was far less. In Sparta it was far less because in Sparta... Oh, no, it wasn't a democracy. But the citizens, like the nobles in Sparta, would kind of function more or less like the democracy. Because they would, influence the king into committing a certain choice. They would be like the advisors of the king. So yeah, you're right, it wasn't a democracy. You got me there.
What system do you think we should have in Britain?
In Britain? Here in Britain? Well, I think we should keep the system that there is, only make minor changes here and there. For example, I think one of the bad things that is going on now is that the House of Lords holds a bit too much power.
So they should be elected, the House of Lords?
Not necessarily. I think the House of Lords should just be taken with a bit more of a grain of salt. No, but seriously, it should have a bit less power to implement their laws. Because basically, the House of Lords are nobles, and they're not elected. They are nobles. They come there by blood. They're there by blood because they are descendants of somebody important. And the thing is, those people, they don't have any interest in actually improving the situation greatly. The only interest they have is in maintaining the status quo over and over and over again. And if some people suffer, as long as you can maintain that status quo, it doesn't matter for them. They don't have any, big investment into the population, into the well-being of the population. The Queen? Well, the Queen is maybe I'll get shot for this, but I don't think the Queen decides all that much nowadays. The Queen kind of is a last resort. If Yeah, because I think, at least from my perspective, I might not be correct, of course. I don't have the perfect opinion of British politics, so this is just my opinion. I have less conviction in this. I think, as far as I see it, the House of Lords is the actual source of power in Britain. That's the main part of power. The Parliament is, of course, important, but it all, of course, depends on the House of Lords, because the people in the Parliament are elected, and the House of Lords have that power indefinitely. So basically, they can accumulate that influence as long as they live. And the politicians can't. The politicians have a very limited time.
You say you're not very invested in British politics. What about European?
Look, I am a bit invested. I'm not incredibly invested. I do know the basics of it.
What kind of system should Europe have, or Ukraine?
Okay, Ukraine. Well, definitely not the one we have now. Right now, I think Ukraine is still an oligarchy, mostly. It was an oligarchy before the revolution. And right now, I'm having a few doubts because this president kind of is trying to change some things, but at the same time, he still might be a figurehead. So I'm not sure about the president that we have nowadays. Either way, oligarchy is a very bad system to have because, it's basically all the flaws of the House of Lords multiplied by 100.
So they have power for life.
They are the mafia that rules the country. Look, that's why I don't like when you compare the British government to mafia, because compared to Ukrainian government or the Russian government, whoa, has nothing to do, man, nothing to do. Like, you can be here talking trash about every single lord, about the queen, about anybody you want. Probably not much will happen to you. If you go to Russia, to Moscow, and you talk shit about Putin, that's it, you get an accidental death with 20 stabs in your belly by a random bomb in the alley that might not be an actual bomb. You see, it's all very convenient. Every person who speaks against the regime there dies, or something happens to them. There's a reporter called Valery Gongadze in Ukraine who was killed. He's one of the important figures in Ukrainian history because he was spreading awareness over the Ukrainian government, and he got killed because of it. Huh? Oh, it was long ago. It was during the time of Kuchma, who was the second president of Ukraine. The first one was Kravchuk, second Kuchma, third Yushchenko, fourth Yanukovych, fifth Poroshenko, and now we have this one, the sixth president, Zelensky.
Is he better than Poroshenko, surely?
Well, it's hard to be worse than Poroshenko. You have to be either Kuchma or Yanukovych to be worse than Poroshenko, because during Yanukovych there were literally people getting shot by the police because they were protesting. Of course, the pro-Russians will say, "Oh, it was the Ukrainians; they were shooting their own people." Yeah, they didn't really have access to weapons, so it's all a bunch of bullshit. I remember you said something like that they were shooting their people with British weapons, or some shit like that.
I was saying Yanukovych was the sniper rifles that were being used on the Euromaidan protests. So you know there was those protests in Kiev. They wanted Ukraine to move into the European world more, away from Russia. And the government at the time was using British sniper rifles to shoot down the protesters.
I don't know about that. Either way, it doesn't really matter where the sniper rifles come from. The British... Look,
if you want, next week I'll find you my citation.
Go ahead, it's fine. But look, either way, it doesn't really matter too much, because the British will sell weapons to both sides if they can. So will the Americans. It's all about selling. It's not about who you're selling it to.
We don't know for sure if the CIA or MI6 are involved in Ukraine. I think because I've read some reports by Ukrainians saying that they've seen MI6.
Look, even in WikiLeaks, about Hillary, it speaks about how they wanted to influence Ukraine. About how they wanted to.
About that? I've never heard of it.
WikiLeaks, look it up. Hillary,
Thursday,
and other people in WikiLeaks speaking about the situation in Ukraine and how they want to influence it in their own favor. I have no illusions on that some people have still in Ukraine that the EU, they will help us, they will bring a good life now. That won't happen.
You don't think that's true?
Yeah, they don't really give a shit.
What's Ukraine supposed to do? They can't have Russia's help. They can't have
Well, first of all, Ukraine needs to see itself as a country and not as a border state. And for that we need nationalism.
It's not very helpful when the name of your country is literally border.
No, for that Ukraine needs nationalism. That is why I don't agree with you. No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. In Russian language it does. In Ukrainian it doesn't.
What does it mean in Ukrainian?
In Ukrainian, Ukraina means the country inside of all countries, the heartland. Because it was the heartland of the Kievan Rus in Kiev. You know what I mean? Inside the border, yeah. Exactly. Oh, he knows. You heard of it.
We have the same title.
Yeah. Exactly. But listen, Kyle, this is why I don't agree with you about your speeches against nationalism. Because yes, nationalism causes a lot of trouble. Yes, nationalism destroys other people if it's in exaggeration. But if there is no nationalism, if there is no love for your own people, then your country loses all of its identity, all of its purpose. It becomes a border state. And there is one rule that functions throughout history in all countries. The strong do what they can, and the weak suffer what they must. If you are not strong, then you are weak, then you are a border state. It's not fascism, Kyle. It's reality. It's reality.
Again, I said this to the pub recently. You're taking that quote out of context.
Kyle, it's reality.
The guy who said that, first
It's a Latin proverb, by the way.
First of all, he was living like more than 2,000 years ago.
So what?
So like, it's a completely different world from then.
People nowadays believe in 2,000-year-old books.
Yeah, no, I know. So it doesn't make it right. Second of all, that quote was there, and it was a like observation of how the situation was unfolding in the Peloponnesian War at that particular moment in time. It wasn't saying that this is how things should be. It was saying just this is how it is right now between the Spartans and the Persians and the Athenians.
Kyle, before
it was about a
listen.
specific moment, and you take it out of its context. And you say, well, now you spin it into a whole ideology.
Listen.
It's like,
before you
why?
decide,
I wonder why you do that.
listen, before you decide how it should be, you need to understand how it is. You can't keep saying it should be like this, it should be like that, if you don't understand how it actually is. You need to understand how things work, how the world functions, and then you might be able to change it.
Should it be the same way it is right now?
That's your problem, Kai. You always delve into how it should be, into morality, how it might be, how we should do it, to be nice, to be kind, to be good. Kyle, it doesn't function like that. You need to protect yourself, and then you also need to protect the others. But first of all, you need to protect yourself.
Doesn't morality help you protect yourself?
Huh?
Doesn't a good, strong moral sense protect yourself? Isn't that a way of looking after your health?
Well,
your relationships?
the problem is your moral sense is not good and strong. Your moral sense is self-destructive. You want to protect the other at the cost of yourself.
How do you know that? And also,
Because that's the conclusion we can make from your
Isn't that the most
speeches.
human thing to do in the world, to sacrifice yourself? for
It's the
someone
most inhuman thing to do.
else? So all those heroic people who go into burning buildings to rescue babies, to save them, and then they get like poisoned from the smoke. They're not heroes, they're not good people.
Kyle,
What about
okay.
all the Ukrainian nationalists sacrificing their lives for the glory of Ukraine? Are they not?
They're doing it for an idea.
Yeah,
They're doing it for the hope that in the future their sacrifice will give something to them and to their
What if they die?
to
They may never
their
succeed.
people.
They may get bombed by or attacked.
Kyle,
by
they're
Russians.
doing it for a reason. They're not just doing good to do good. They're doing good because eventually that good will amount into a better life for their country. They're sacrificing themselves for their country,
So they're
not for nothing. Huh?
They're not protecting themselves.
Yeah, but the country is in their head linked to themselves. You see, this is the thing you need to understand about my ideology. I don't have an ultimately selfish ideology. Nothing like that. If you have an ultimately selfish ideology, it's also self-destructive. Because to be able to survive with other people, you need the cooperation of other people. And to have the cooperation of other people, you need to help the other people. But every time you help the other people, it's a trade-off. You help the other people to be helped yourself. And thus you help each other, you support each other, you hold each other.
It's a deep human need.
Yes, exactly. But it's not just do good to just for the sake of good. It's do good for the sake of a greater good that will happen eventually, or that will come to you as a reward of your good. Yeah, because this is actual functional morality. Not just, look, Kyle, the difference is, imagine that I'm the king of the UK. I'm the king of Great Britain right now. About your majesty. I will not help another country if there is absolutely nothing that my country will gain from it. I will not give that help, I will not sacrifice resources and manpower and money of my own country just to give away something. If there is not an agreement that something will come in exchange, even if it's as vague as a favor in the future, you know what I mean? That's a fool's errand. A complete fool's errand. If you keep helping other people without any guarantee that something good will come back to you, you're just sacrificing yourself for nothing.
Maybe it's a fool's errand if you want to maintain your power as a king of England.
Kyle,
be a good human being.
does this world have thieves? Can you tell a thief by his face? No. Then why would you do something good for a person if that person might be a thief and he will use you and he will not give anything back to you?
For him, and I might change him and stop him doing that.
No, it's too late already. You already gave him the resources, you already gave him the effort, you already gave him what you had.
So, if you're working with someone and they steal something from you or they do something bad to you, then you should stop being friends with them.
Well, yeah, Kyle, but listen, it... What? He wants what? Who? What? Ah, Vladimir Klitschko. Oh, what I think about Klitschko. He's an idiot. He's completely brain dead. He's the biggest... He's the biggest... Sorry? Who? Who said it about me? Did you say it about me? I just can't hear you. I can't hear the punchline.
No, you just talk about Vladimir and then you say who?
Vladimir Klitschko. You want... Okay, let me get this straight. You want me to give my opinion... I can kind of hear you, but are you applying me calling an idiot to Klitschko? You're applying that same thing to myself. Ah, what Klitschko has to say about me? He doesn't know about me. I'm irrelevant. I'm nobody. Modin, he's a big celebrity. Now I'm irrelevant. I'm nobody. I just speak out a little bit. No, but look, about Klitschko, he's an idiot. He's the biggest shame Ukraine ever had. He's such an idiot that every time he goes abroad, yeah, I know, but the one that's mayor of Kiev.
Just a question to change things. Do you think Ukraine should join NATO? This would like to expand to the borders of Russia.
Okay. I don't think that's the best answer to the problems of Ukraine. No, I understand. It's a good question. I don't think joining NATO is the solution to the Ukrainian problems. But at least it might get Ukraine rid of Russia. At last, it might at least help Ukraine get Russian troops off its lands. It might. So it's a lesser evil right now than to continue the situation, than to join Russia. To join Russia is absolutely the worst thing Ukraine has in front of it. Yeah, not again. If we join Russia again, we're done for. We disappear as a people. We might even disappear as a race. We might disappear as a genetic code. Because during the Soviet Union, there were two Holodomors, with which all of them together, 10 million Ukrainians died. Lots of people died. Sorry? The Ukrainians. The original people were from Kiev and Rus. The original... they were not Ukrainians or Russians. The people of the Kiev and Rus, they kind of separated into Ukrainians and Russians. You know what I mean? Yeah, basically. I don't hate them. Well, if you look at history, brothers are the ones that fight each other the most. People who are close to each other, people who live close to each other. They fight each other because they're close, their interests are intertwined, and thus for their interests, they fight. Now, what I hate about Russia is the mentality, the czarist, absolutist, this iron fist rule mentality. That's what I hate. Now, Russian culture, Russian language, Russian customs are not very different from Ukrainian. Huh? Why should I be? It's similar to Ukrainian. I'm not offended by it. I just think Ukraine should have officially one language, Ukrainian. In terms of documents, in terms of official, things, official businesses, of lawyers, like processes, it's court. Yeah, there are some dialects, but not too many. Like a midterm between Russian and Ukrainian. But I think it should be cleaned into a cleaner version of Ukrainian with a cleaner grammar, because I prefer if people speak proper Russian with me than if they speak a broken up Ukrainian and Russian. Like if they speak a broken up language, I don't really like it. If they speak proper Ukrainian or proper Russian, then it's good. I like it. I do. My Russian is not perfect, but I don't. I think it's decent. I think it's decent. I can get my point across. But yeah, either way, I don't really hate Russia. I just hate the way Russia is being ruled. And since Ivan the Terrible, the system has remained the same. The iron fist. The iron fist. That's how it was.
Yeltsin was soft, and the Americans.
Sorry?
Yeltsin was soft in comparison to others.
Yeltsin was soft. Well, so you're saying that the Soviet Union collapsed because of the Americans? It has some influence, but I think the main reasons were that the Soviet Union was trying to transition from a rule of the iron fist to a more kind of democratic and more open-minded rule. And the problem with that is they're incompatible. They're completely and utterly incompatible. No, the two ways of ruling people. The open democratic rule and the closed iron fist. The dictatorial, the absolutist monarchical rule. They're incompatible. And the transition was impossible from the very beginning. You see, with the perestroika and with the glasnost, they were trying to kind of finish the corruption, to remove some of the absolute power of the state, but it didn't work. It dissolved the states, everybody decided to just have their freedoms, because nobody really wanted to make part of the Soviet Union. It was all, you know, the overlordship of Russia. And it all dissolved, you know, now it all ended, but, you know, Putin kind of wants to keep some of the influence in his hands. It's a lost cause. Russia is a fake boogeyman, it's a ghost boogeyman. If Russia didn't have the nukes, they would be gone. They would cease to exist long ago. The only thing that's holding them is that sheer fear of the nukes, that brute force, just as it always has. Sorry? North Korea? Well, the truth about North Korea is nobody really gives a shit about North Korea. So, yeah, there's not much to look for in North Korea. Yeah. I mean, even before they had the nuclear weapons, nobody really gave a shit because people don't want to, just don't care about it too much. Now, Russia is more important than North Korea because it has lots of resources, it has a lot more people, it has influence. So taking over Russia is a much bigger importance than North Korea. North Korea is just kind of a border state. It doesn't really matter too much. But yeah, either way, that was... Where's Kyle? He left. After Putin, what? Yeah, I think Russia will cease to exist. Yeah. You see, this is why I kind of understand the Russians in the way they're clinging to Putin, because he is keeping Russia together. Once he goes, Russia dissolves. Simple as that. But my question is, should it keep itself together? As one country, yeah. Would the people who are living in Russia now not be better off just separating into different countries? If they don't like each other, if they don't want to abide by the same rules, if the only thing keeping them together is the absolute authority of Putin, why should they should they be together? Their life is not getting much better. I mean, the Roman Empire, it built the beginning of the system, the basics of law of the West. It was like the foundation of the Western culture. They built roads, they built aqueducts, they invented many different technologies of, for example, of harvesting, of crop planting crops, many different things that the Romans invented. The calendar we have nowadays was actually created by Julius Caesar, because Julius Caesar, before him, the way of the calendar, their calendar was different. He was the Pontifex Maximus, I think that's the name. And thus, every single year, he would have to shift some months to kind of shift their calendar. It was a very complicated system. Yeah. Julius Caesar kind of started changing the calendar into a similar calendar to what we have nowadays. That was the beginning of the similarity.
suggests that Russia will probably break up, fragment.
Yeah.
And most of the nationalist movements are non-Russian in Russia. They're likely to be Tatars and peoples of the North Caucasus. The majority of Russians, whether from Moscow or Vladivostok, they still have the sense of themselves as one, composing one nation. So why would they? What would they break? Which kind of state would they fragment it to?
Those nationalist groups of different ethnicities, especially, they will want their independence.
Yeah, but they're a small fraction of Russia. The Tatar republics.
That's a funny.
And the North Caucasus.
In terms of population, they are small.
And in terms of
no, not in terms of regions. Most of Siberia is populated by Mongolic tribes.
Do they have a separatist movement?
Well, not a very strong separatist movement, but if Russia collapses, they will most likely achieve their independence. And they will become something similar, like Saudi Arabia, for example. Like Saudi Arabia became famous because of the oil, the same way the Siberians will become rich because of their gas. Exactly. Because of the gas and the natural resources. So they only have a lot to gain by separating from Russia. They will be able to get all the money for themselves. Now, obviously, actually, Russians, they will suffer from it, probably. Near Mongolia, close to Mongolia, I don't know how it's called. I don't know the name of that region. But I have heard that many people want to fragment from that region too. Yeah, they want to kind of join more to China or to Mongolia or to create their own state than to keep with Russia. They don't really want to be with Russia too much. Most of Russia. Oh, I don't know the percentage. More, basically, probably. Siberia is basically most of Russia in terms of territory. No, it's not. It's not. But it has a lot of natural resources. That's the thing. Huh? Yeah. Exactly. Actually, lots of Ukrainians were sent to Siberia to build up the cities. So lots of those cities were, lots of those cities were built up by those people who were sent to the Gulag. Yeah, that's it. Just a while ago, I spoke with Exactly. Lots of people. Just a while ago, I spoke with a guy who was defending Russia, who was very pro-Russian. And he was a pretty reasonable guy, so I started asking him, why are you pro-Russian? Basically, we came to the conclusion that he's pro-Russia because he doesn't like the USA. I told him, look, that's a very big fallacy, because just because the USA is a malefic imperialist power in foreign lands doesn't mean Russia is a good power, doesn't mean Russia is any better. In fact, there have been many parts of history where one evil has been fighting another evil. The perfect example is the Soviet Union fighting Nazi Germany. Two great evils fighting each other. Doesn't mean one of them is good, one of them is bad. Yeah. They plan to divide Poland between them, to divide Poland in half. Half of it would go to Nazi Germany, half of it would go to the Soviet Union. Yeah, it was called the Molotov Treaty. The Molotov Treaty, yeah, something like that. But anyway, guys, I think I'll wrap this up. I've been speaking to her for a long time. If Kyle wants to speak again, bring him back.
Content over everything from your humanity.
Come, man, say it straight. Man, don't listen to BBC. Man, don't listen to ITV. Listen. Man, don't listen to BBC. Man, don't listen to ITV. I don't even listen to Sky Radio. I don't listen to COE. Man, don't listen to BBC. Man, don't listen to ITV. I don't even listen to Sky.
Happy with you.
Man, don't listen to COE. Man, just listen to COE. Man, just listen to COE.